Hello.
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 I've got everything set up and working properly. Today, today is super duper write a lot day.
Wonderful.
Yay!
Right.
Let's do. Let's do. So this morning we're starting with project ideation, which is a little bit unfortunate because that's sort of one of the more, I don't know, difficult ones to do brain think time. But we'll start with your pillars and gameplay connection documents. So what I kind of want you to do is take the document that you critiqued and then the critique that you wrote about that document and just kind of give us not like a super formal presentation but just an overview of what you what you did and what you thought about it. And my goal is going to be to sort of critique your critiques so you kind of understand like that process.
Okay.
And we're gonna just talk about that stuff for a little bit. Then what we're gonna do after that is we're gonna get into just lots of writing. We're just gonna write like a lot. I want you to today is going to be a lot about sheer quantity. I kind of want you to start getting used to just writing like large quantities. You remember that design document for the loot box that I showed you a bit ago? That was
Yeah.
I don't know. Let me look that up so I can give you actual numbers for reference.
Yeah, it was a lot of pages. It was more than one. I remember that.
Definitely a lot more than one. Let's see. I wrote it's about a 2,400 word document, 2,400 plus plus UI mockups that I did, and that whole process, the 2,400 words plus UI mockups, probably took about an hour and a half. Um, I just I just want you to kind of understand like what the scale is when your job is producing documentation, which part of it often is, and also just understanding that the process of documentation, and this is going to be a big part of it. We're going to be talking about documentation as part of the design process and how it's a tool to design better, not just a method of communicating a complete design. In fact, it basically isn't at all that. Documentation is pretty much always just a living document that updates as you go. It allows you to kind of get ideas out and sort of soft commit to a certain approach, and then that gives you a thing to like test or prototype, and then you go, oh, this thing that I prototyped um, is terrible. Why is it terrible? And you can kind of like update your document as you go, like, oh, this probably doesn't work. This probably doesn't work. Let's change this to this. And it's really like it's about that living documentation process of just constantly updating. And it's important to keep updating your document because if you don't, what ends up happening is not only will you forget stuff, but also your document is your number one best tool for like the high level overview of a game or of a project that you're working on, so that you can understand how all the elements work together and what elements are really required to make that happen. And it really is amazing how effective the writing process is at doing that, because once you start getting used to the idea of like documenting in some degree of detail, you start to realize like, okay, this is going to like point to this system, or like you can open this menu this way, and you go, well, I don't have that system, that doesn't exist. So okay, so you like make a section in your document, or you make another document that the document links to, and you go, that's that system, I need to design that system at some point. And because you have it referenced in this other thing that you're making. It doesn't exist, right? Especially when you're making a game from scratch, nothing exists yet, right? So that happens a lot. But then just being able to keep track of like, oh, I'm gonna have, I'm gonna have like a weapon upgrade system. I have no idea how that's gonna work right now, but I'm gonna have a weapon upgrade system, and I know I need a weapon upgrade system because this progression system uses that, and I don't really know how the progression system works yet either. But I know I need a progression system because I know I'm gonna have like a linear, like story based, action game or whatever it is, and then you can go back and start figuring out what that core combat is before you design the weapon system. You just know that you're going to have a weapon system, probably. And also, if you decide after you design the combat system, like, wait, I don't need a weapon upgrade system at all. I can just have like some other thing that you think will work way better for whatever reason. You can just delete the weapon system, the weapon upgrade system, because what? It's like 6 sentences. Who cares? Much better than having 7 prototypes of different systems before you start thinking about your game at a high level structural way. So it's very important to be able to do documentation in a way that's useful and practical and valuable. We'll get into that, but anyway, I've broken that down into a few steps. One of the steps is just learning how to think more deeply and in a much more detail-oriented way about design, which is kind of something that we've been doing basically nonstop since we started. Today, after we do our pillars thing, I want to get into one of the components of documentation, which is I just want you to get used to writing like a lot. I want to get you used to writing in large quantities, and that's it's important to be accustomed to quickly producing reasonable-ish documents. I'll give you another example of what I mean by reasonable-ish. Actually, I can show that too. I just realized I actually have a document that I did that's like a really middling kind of, it's like not that great of a design document, mostly because it wasn't intended to be a design document. Go. I did find it. Amazing. Okay. Here's the document that I made. I have a whole bunch of notes on it, but we're going to ignore those. So the document here is basically just I wanted to do like a quick 2D bullet hell thing, and it just says the overview just describes on a slightly technical level of like just the things that the player can do. It's a top-down bullet hell. Players control a small ship in an abstract space, dodging incoming enemies, projectiles, and other dangers. So, quick overview of just like the broad things players can do in the game. The players can move freely in 2 dimension, and has a short dash with iframes. Important. Dash with iframes versus dash without iframes. Changes the game. These are the player's main methods of managing the obstacles, and players must manage them while dealing damage to enemies or a boss. In some cases, players simply need to survive until the end of the segment. So this is a gameplay overview. The reason it's called a gameplay overview as opposed to like a game overview or like a core pillars section is because, as you can probably tell, this is slightly technical. It's really just like a description of the things players can do. Now, the reason for this is because who the document is for is important. And it talks about like, so this is because this project serves as an educational tool first and foremost. Its high-level loop is extremely simple. The main menu contains new game, stage select, options, and exit game. Each is extremely simple. That's a little bit redundant, but the focus, this is like in reference to a high-level project objective. Since the project has a particular objective, it is adhering to that. Then it just explains like, here's what new game, stage select, and options do. Here's how the stages start and end. When the player starts a new game or selects a stage, a brief transition animation plays where the player flies on screen. Any relevant obstacles are shown. See the player feedback section. And the player is given a 3-second countdown that is accompanied by an introductory build-up jingle. When this countdown ends, the stage's music begins to play. The player gains control of the player character, and the stage's events begin to play. Play continues. Again, this is very like almost rote, right? Like these are the events that occur. These are the things I need. The reason for this was because the intended audience of the document, so to speak, was just a programmer. I just needed a programmer to understand the basic implementation that I needed in order to make the gameplay work. My job is to understand what that looks like. The programmer's job is to understand how to implement that efficiently. My job is to understand what the major needs of the system are. Right? As the designer, I need to know what those are. Straightforward. Thing is, and this is what I kind of wanted to point out, this is kind of a high level document. It's actually missing quite a lot of detail. For example, here on the victory screen, it says once the player has achieved one or all of the win conditions for a given stage, they're given a screen that's functionally very similar to the defeat screen. Instead of defeat, the screen now reads victory. The highest score is still displayed, but the screen indicates that the highest score will now be saved, and if and only if blah blah blah. And I like at this point, what you would want to do in a proper large design document is identify like this is what the layout of that looks like. This is what the UX of that is. These are the options you have for interacting with that screen. These are like the buttons that exist on the screen, or whatever else. These are the animations that I'm going to need. This is how the art looks. Like you'd have all of that. But what I did here was I just like typed up real quick things that the programmer needs to know to make a decent first prototype. The objective of this document was to give a programmer enough information to start on a basic prototype. That was it. Which means it's not going to be perfect. It's not really going to be what I envisioned. But the point of this is, here's kind of the basic idea. Can you like do a prototype of this? And the answer is yes. So done. Until I get the prototype back. And the idea is that the prototype is supposed to be done quickly so that it can be iterated on. And a programmer hypothetically should know that this is not a waterfall process where I go, here's the document, and then they take the document and build a prototype. And now I have the prototype and we move on with the design from there. We take the prototype and we go, okay, this is definitely not going to be right. Because every time I say literally anything to anybody about anything, there's a small amount, at least a small amount of miscommunication that occurs. And the thing is, when you're talking to people in like your day-to-day life, you don't notice that because the crucial information that's being communicated in a colloquial setting or in just in a conversational setting is usually much more personal and much more like emotional rather than a high degree or like a high density of fine detail, right? If you're making plans with somebody, you have a couple of details that you need to work out, but it's like a time and a place. That's about it. And everything else you just kind of figure out. But in a technical situation, obviously, you need way more fine detail. Which means you have way more points of failure for the communication. Way more points of failure for the communication. So the way to address that is not to sit down and stress over every detail in depth, because those points of failure will just always exist, and you'll never actually know why those points of failure exist. Right? So let me give you an example so that makes sense. If I was trying to communicate, let's take players control a small ship in an abstract space, dodging incoming. Okay, here's dodging incoming enemies. Now I make reference to having a dash with iframes, but dodging enemies is not just using the dash. It's also about positioning and anticipating and like watching patterns and things like that. So I need to make sure. So I need to make sure.
Are we meant to be seeing this, or?
Oh God. Well, it's okay. I'm saying it, but it'll probably
Okay.
help to have the thing. There you go. It's this.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was something.
Yeah, there's a So the example here is that if I have a thing that just says dodge incoming enemies, the programmer doesn't necessarily know all of the things that I want in the dodge, and in a lot of ways, I don't yet know all of the things that I want in the dodge. So the way to do that is not to sit here and go, I'm going to take like a day and explicate slowly everything that I could possibly mean by dodging and all of the things that I need in order to make that work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say the player can move freely in 2D space, which also is slightly ambiguous from a programmatical perspective. And I'm going to say there's a dash with iframes. It doesn't specify a distance or a duration or anything like that. And then I can just ship it off to a programmer. And if they have questions, they can ask questions. And if they, but they're going to make a lot of assumptions, and they're going to build the prototype based on those assumptions. And then what I'm going to get back as a prototype is probably it's actually fairly different in the details of the thing that I envisioned. But that's a much more efficient process to take the prototype and go, okay, here's a concrete thing that you made. Let me look at the details of that, and we can talk about what details we want to keep, change, or add to that thing that exists. Is a much more productive conversation than me sitting down for a day and like trying to abstractly figure all that out in a document. So the way to deal with these communication issues, the certainty that will be a high degree of miscommunication, especially in the details, is to get a rough document out and then send it off. And the way that works, again, let's do a quick word count. 2,600 word document, an hour of work. Right? I spend an hour, I just write a bunch of stuff. It's close enough, and I send it off to a programmer to build. The end. And that's useful because the idea is not that this document is going to be perfect and I'm going to get the thing back that I want. There's going to be a lot of problems, but I'm going to understand what those problems are by virtue of getting questions from the programmer or by virtue of getting the prototype back and seeing where things don't align with what I expected. Because some of my expectations are not going to be communicated, the programmer will be making some assumptions that the programmer doesn't even know, right? They're called tacit assumptions, assumptions that you make that guide your decision making, but that you aren't even consciously aware of. And there's a bunch of that. So there's going to be all kinds of miscommunications at any given point in time, which is why living documents are so important, because then I can have this document, get a prototype, come back, and then I can either amend the document or make a new document and go to the programmer and say, here are the changes to the prototype that I want. And it'll be a lot of things like I would want to get more tools, for example. Maybe I want more tools to affect the gameplay more on my end. So I want more like public facing variables so that I can more finely adjust the feel of the ship movement, for instance. Like, oh, none of those variables exist, so we need to the programmer needs to redo the movement so that the ship has an acceleration value, an animation, a speed value. The dash has like a duration and a distance, an iframe duration and a distance, and all these things are public variables so that I can adjust easily in the engine. Unreal 5 makes it very easy, which is nice, especially animation stuff and sound effects. Anyway, that's the idea of documentation. It's kind of like why we care about it, both from a solo developer perspective and from a team perspective. It's definitely more important from a team perspective because you need to be communicating concepts back and forth and iterating not only on the concept, but also on the method by which you communicate with your team. And that's why documentation is important. Without documentation, you might be iterating on the concept, but you're never iterating on the process of communication, meaning that the team cohesion doesn't increase over time. And that's how you create this like exponential improvement on a game project, is by having, you get better at the work, but you also get better at that iteration process. You get better at getting better also. So you get like exponential improvement. In solo development, the main value of documentation is just to make sure that your vision is actually in place. You can get feedback on it early. You can start being very critical of your own work very early. And that leads me sort of transitions nicely back into your pillars documents. I, I there are two methods of getting critique for your work. One is external, getting critique and feedback from other people, and the other is being very, very self critical, always in a way that's highly productive. You can kind of get away with dropping one of those, but ideally you do both. And if you do end up dropping one of them, like for example, people tend to not like putting their work in front of others really early on. And that's usually because people don't know how to critique an early people I have found are generally very bad at critiquing early stage work because they just read it, feel a way about it, and their critique specifically comes from how they feel about it. And what a good critique for early work usually looks like is you try to envision what the ultimate product is supposed to look like and then ask questions about how this creates that in an attempt to a find out if your understanding of the vision is accurate, and b if the document pushes you there. Because if your idea of what the sometimes the best feedback is to just like see what other people how people interpret your writing. You can do this in other contexts too. So another example of this would be something like if I write a description of a character for fiction and then I give it to an artist, how closely does that artist's rendition match my vision? That's like that's a potential way of testing how accurately I'm describing the thing in my head, right? So you getting that feedback is very very important, uh, and self critique is also important because what self critique does is it allows you to slowly over time develop the skill of being able to write much more quickly, because through being critical of your own work you start to identify not only what's wrong with each individual thing that you're writing, but also what caused you in a very like introspective self-awareness way, what caused you to think in a way that resulted in this like miscommunication, and how can you resolve that. And you get to the point where eventually you can start writing a lot very quickly and be relatively like close enough, and getting used to being close enough and not caring that people are going to be like, oh well, it doesn't, I don't think this game doesn't sound very fun. This document is not supposed to make the game sound fun. This is a technical overview for a programmer. So that's why, and that's why last week I said that we should do these game pillars and the critiques, because I want you to get used to a productive critique process. And this is the kind of stuff that we're going to be kind of focusing on later this morning. And the critique stuff is the stuff we're going to be focusing on essentially now. All right. That's my overview for why this matters and why you should care, and for what vaguely documentation is. It'll change, by the way. Documentation will be different depending on what you're doing. It's not always going to be these technical breakdowns, although understanding the details at play is always important. Okay. Let's do pillars.
Okay. Should I go first?
Sure.
All right. Keaton, I think I got you were Ghosts of Tsushima, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was good. You explained it well. I liked how you had all the game pillars, gameplay. I thought it was the first thing I thought was weird is you separated game and gameplay pillars. I probably would have just mostly merged. I would have merged those two. And what I ended up for main game pillars was combat, exploration, and art direction. and I thought that because would you had graphics in game pillars. I thought that was I'm obviously it has good graphics, but graphics age, and I thought art direction was a better fit for a main game pillar because art direction makes the world more interesting, which makes players want to explore it. And exploring is definitely a pillar. It's an open world game, and of course, combat's also on that list because it's a third person action game. If combat wasn't a main pillar, I don't even know what the point of it being there was. Um, but overall, I thought it was really good, and I haven't played the game myself, obviously. So if I'm dead wrong, then I am. But I did watch some gameplay, some reviews, and I think I just merged those two categories, and that's what I ended up with. I have the document here. It's I'm not going to read it all out though. Anyone, what do you think?
I will
Any
say the main like I understand where that is. The main reason why I also put gameplay like combat in like more so the gameplay pillars because of it's part of like the gameplay itself. Like the actual game pillars for me was because of the fact that it's a major story based game where yes you
Mhm.
can explore, but it's majorly focused on story more so often than others. And the challenge was also part of that for the reason that well as you progress into like the game it gets more challenging. You have to like focus on what to strategize more when it comes to Ghost of Tsushima and like focus on what to use on certain enemies.
how hard
It's a
does
challenging strategy based type of combat in a sense.
how I don't know how hard does it get by the end? Is it like a Japanese themed Dark Souls by the end, or is it a little lighter than that?
I'd say in a sense kind of like a Japanese theme based Dark Souls in a sense. That's the best way to put it. Yeah, because usually, like I mean, relatively, if you start to understand the game more, it gets easier, but at the same time, it also gets more challenging because there's more enemies you have to face, more leaders, more big guys, more I guess say like relatively challenging enemies that you have to like either time when their attack is about to hit and block it, or evade it, or when know when you're supposed to attack and when you shouldn't, and
Right.
know when like certain strategies are supposed to like be used in like certain fights or like certain segments. That was the main reason why like I like separated the game and gameplay pillars. It's because
Okay.
of like it's because of how it is. Um, which is why like I made the gameplay pillars and then put them as the combat pillars, the stealth pillars, and the exploration pillars.
Yeah, I see them, and those are just like dice further breaking down our main pillars.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and like kind of explaining like why like for certain things like with exploration, it does encourage parkour because there's a lot of areas that you have to kind of jump across and go through obstacles just to get to what you're trying to get to, like investigations,
Almost like an
usually, and
Assassin's Creed game.
scenery. Yeah,
Right. Okay.
I think
No, I thought your pillars they're like if it did describe the game and it was good. I just I just put those two categories together. All I did was put those two categories together, swap out and change the wording of some words, that was pretty much it. I thought it was a good pillar breakdown. I liked it.
Mhm.
I do have the whole thing here if you want to see it. No, I can send it to you if you'd like. But that's all. I think that's all for me.
So yeah, could you send that to me? I would like to at least see it. I want to see it at least.
Yeah, I'll get it to you.
Uh, yeah. One thing definitely that I notice is that okay, I'll start with this one. graphics is basically never going to be a gameplay pillar. Graphics is just like you need to see what's going on. It's really there to like enable everything else. You mentioned, for example, um, it enables or encourages exploration through art direction. Well, that suggests to me that a pillar of the gameplay is exploration, because what are you focused on? Focused on exploring. And
Exploring.
then what's one way that you explore? Well, sometimes you see something that looks interesting from a distance and you go check out what it is. So how do we do that? Well, we can use framing and art. We can use art direction stuff like framing and lighting and things like that to guide you there, to show you that. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say framing and lighting are gameplay pillars. But if you
I didn't have.
but
I see.
if
I
you
see.
if you break down what art direction is, it's basically framing and lighting and like how like the vibe. Um, those could be art pillars. Like those could be things that
Okay.
you call out in what's called an art bible, where you identify like all the artistic visual art elements that you need, or in a presentation content section of a design. But graphics will basically never be a pillar because they generally enable something else. I can't really think of a single situation where graphics would be the pillar. There are situations maybe where there's like a visual puzzle, but then puzzles are the pillar. Puzzle solving.
Hmm.
And visuals enable that, but puzzle solving is really the pillar.
Hmm. Oh, I also ditched a story from game pillar. And my game pillars ended up being combat exploration, art direction. Forgot to mention that too.
Okay.
It's still important, but I didn't put it in the big three.
How much? I guess one question to ask about story in terms of a pillar is how much does it influence the rest of the game? Like how important is it compared to combat?
Put this into the like proper words of it. Uh, it's usually because it's been a while since I've actually played Ghost of Tsushima now, so my judgment could be very wrong about this. It's just more so in the fact that like uh when when you're usually progressing through the story, a lot of things end up like more so changing, like the environment ends up changing, like because you're playing as a character named Jin Sakai. He's one of the known as Lord Sakai. He's trying to kind of fight off the I think they were called the Murren. The Murren, yeah. I'll just say that because I can't really fully remember how they were pronounced. But trying to protect his people, protecting his homeland, and also saving his grandfather. And when you're in the progression of like going through the story, as you kind of like get further in, things in the environment kind of start changing because the Murren starts to take over more areas. It's burning down areas. The area, like the actual environment itself, kind of looks different because of it. So the main reason why I put story as like more of a major game pillar is because of the effect that it has on the actual game.
What's a game that everybody what's a game that anybody would call particularly story driven? Like if you think about what a story driven game is, what's a really good example of that?
A story-driven game.
Yeah.
Um,
Something like Sonic?
S-
Would you
Sonic. I
say
thought
Sonic
Sonic
is
was a
story
plot.
driven? Would you say that's a really particularly story driven game?
So, no.
No, I'd say a story-driven game would be, I don't know, what's a for any Naughty Dog game. Trying to think of an example I haven't said a million times already. The Walking Dead. Walking Dead games are very story driven. There's almost no gameplay other than choosing between dialogue options and investigating things. That's a story driven game.
Would everyone agree that those Telltale games are pretty story driven? Good examples of like a highly
Yeah.
story driven game.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
What's an example of
like
the
I should say
opposite?
story driven.
A game that's like not story driven at all.
Super Mario Brothers
Hollow Knight?
U. I just finished playing that.
Okay.
Hollow
So,
Knight is not really story driven, in my opinion.
well, what's the least story driven game you can think of?
Least uh tight Call of Duty.
Yeah,
It's
just
more
like some
multiplayer based.
generic multiplayer, like
Have you
Fortnite.
have you played Call of Duty? uh
Yeah.
Call of Duty
Their
multiplayer
campaigns,
specifically is pretty
they
not
they've
story
been
driven.
sacrificing their campaign for more multiplayer stuff, I believe.
Multiplayer based content, basically.
Yeah.
Well, if we take
So
I think we can probably take just about any. We could probably use a cleaner example in terms of just choosing like any competitive multiplayer game that's related. Chess. It's not story driven at all. Um,
yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
so where on the scale does Ghost of Tsushima fall in terms of being story driven? Is it more toward the Telltale end or more toward the chess end? And how far toward that end?
I would say towards the chest end, but like almost still in the middle of both of them, but more towards the chest. Because I played Ghost of Tsushima and the story wasn't that big, but it was like in the middle between what we have for options here.
If okay, let's take Ghost of Tsushima, and instead of saying it's story driven, replace the word story. If you had to replace the word story with something else in Ghost of Tsushima, what would you replace it with?
Just find a different meaning for the word story, like narrative driven.
No, just like remove story as the word completely. It's not story driven. If it's not story driven, what is it driven instead?
Exploration driven? Or
Well, let me put it another way. If you were to make a prototype of Telltale's Walking Dead, like a 30-second gameplay prototype, what features and mechanics would you prioritize and add? Remember, with a prototype, you need something done really, really quickly. So very, very few features, like one or two. What would you add?
Could I go, or is this a question for
Open.
Keaton?
This is open. Anybody.
Well, the Telltale games. Here's the thing. Like, are the decisions you make are most of the decisions you make in Ghost of Tsushima based on the story? Because in Telltale games, they are like what you choose. Even the things you choose to investigate would be driven by the story. So, but like sure, the story really is really good in Ghost of Tsushima. If you think it is, that's good. But will it affect how you approach a combat encounter? Probably not. So I would prioritize narrative and the decision making mechanic. If I was making a Telltale prototype, I would not put really any story
What
into
would
a
that
Ghost of Tsushima prototype.
what would that look like? What does everybody
In the
think
Tell,
in making a Telltale? You're a team of developers. You need to make a prototype Telltale game, and you're
I
gonna
mean,
pitch it to me. And it's a 30. You have 30 seconds of gameplay. You're gonna pitch me a 30 game. Give me a 30-second prototype pitch. What are you building?
I would build. I would almost not put a whole lot of gameplay in. I would focus on making a really obviously for 30 seconds a really good dialogue tree, because that's the entire point is you get four different options per
would I be
encounter.
able
Sometimes
to
it's like
make
two.
it like
Hmm?
what I would do is make since we have decisions and telltales, like oh, if I choose this path, this will happen. If I choose this path, this will happen. Or if I choose this person, they die. Well, if I choose this person, they survive. If I don't choose this person, they die, right? So I would do it like in what is that called again? It's like uh it's kind of like like when you use Obsidian and it has like the little like dots. It's like this dot and then it can branch off to like these two decisions or
Flowchart?
something like that. Yeah, flowchart. I'd probably give you like a small like flow chart on like what I need to
Okay.
happen and stuff like that.
So if you put those two things together, you have what? You have a focus on narrative concepts, character and story
Hmm.
elements, like plot elements, character decisions in the story. And then you
Hmm.
have consequential outcomes where something happens, right? You would structure it like, okay, 30 seconds, right away, something has to happen. Then that event leads to something else. And at the end of that 30 seconds, we need to make sure that it's clear that the decision you made at the beginning of the 30 seconds is being like called back and it's being shown to
Yeah.
you that there's a consequence here. This character dies. Why? Because you decided this thing earlier, right? You have to decide. So, an example of that might be at the very beginning, you decide, like, this person is going to go on a thing. Where do you send them? You go, I'm going to send them over there. And then at the end of it, they die because over there was, I don't know, very dangerous. So they died. Um, then in order to make that work, the work that we have to do as developers now is we need to make sure that the story makes a lot of sense. We need to make sure that the narrative justifies that decision such that the player making the decision understands that there's a lot of things. Like, for example, we might tell the player, we might know we want to tell the player the place that over here has a chance of getting you good supplies, but also is very dangerous. And we tell you that ahead of time. So when you make the decision to send the person there and they die, you're like, okay, well, we knew that was a risk. And then that consequence feels like it's contiguous, feels like it makes sense, um,
Oh,
and
a
connects to the
question before we
actual
continue.
decision you made as a player.
Okay, what would I be able to do for mine? Because Charles isn't here and I can't really get him to like.
We're still just gonna go over it. It doesn't really matter.
Okay, just going
He's the
over
only one who loses out.
it.
So
Ooh.
it's the thing is, it's not really true
I
because
believe
I'm
he
recording this,
had
so
the.
he'll see it.
I think after as well he has he has yours, Dave?
Yeah, I think he has mine. The one I made was already made. Did he
Okay.
he probably didn't give it to you, Corey, so you couldn't show
I
what
don't
he
think
wrote.
so. I don't think so, but I can always just go over it real quick too at the end. If that becomes necessary. Um, so okay, so we're making this Telltale game, right? And we've kind of identified like the core decision that players are going to make. And if we think about it from the perspective of it being story driven, we've identified the focus that in that 30-second section of what really we want to highlight, right? Because that is the core of that Telltale game. There might be a bunch of other stuff that we could add. Adding those things might make the game better, might make the game a lot better. But really, that's the essence of it, right? It's that's the kind of decision that you make in that game over and over and over. And then, like, everything really contorts around that decision, meaning that the story drives, and because the story drives that decision, that becomes a very story driven game. Whereas, let's say we're prototyping a new Mario game. Same thing. You're a team of developers. You're pitching the new Mario game to me. You're going to give me a 30-second gameplay prototype. What do you develop?
Most new Mario games have some new power up, like the elephant suit. So what I would do is
Oh,
it.
no,
Oh,
we were doing a multiplayer game, weren't we? We were doing a multiplayer. That's right. We were doing a competitive multiplayer game.
oh,
Um,
no Mario.
right.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're giving me a prototype of a competitive multiplayer game to show me how it's to give me an idea of how the game's going to work, which means you have to again the same thing we did with the Telltale game. We have to distill it down to its very 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 core, right? The absolute essence of it.
Two teams. how many like on the opposite teams we would need to put like a 5v5, 6v6, 7v7, whichever one you want, right?
Yeah, we need to
Yeah,
identify team
I'm
size.
Mm-hmm.
Could be
Different team
1v1.
size,
StarCraft is a 1v1.
1v1. Yeah,
True.
there could be different sizes of like teams. 12v12 on shipment. That's chaotic right there.
What kind of game is it, right?
Um,
What's the
yeah.
core gameplay of the what kind of game is it?
Well,
Truthfully,
let's just
multiplayer is a
like
tricky example because multiplayer is. If anybody pitched a multiplayer game to me in the context of this course, I would just say no. Don't do that. Simply don't.
I want to make a
Because you have to identify
multiplayer
a lot of
game.
stuff.
No, just a
The
no.
the reason for that is very simple. If you wanted to say I want to make a competitive shooter, first you have to design a shooter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to design a multiplayer version of the shooter. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. And if you were going to do a multiplayer game that's built around multiplayer, now it becomes how do we make use of the fact that it's multiplayer and make that the specific core of it? Team-based games like League of Legends or whatever, where there are different roles that people take, are an example of that. But if we were to do like a shooter, like what's a good example? Um, well, Doom is a great example because that's the first shooter. So you look at Doom. There's not any story in Doom. Would anybody ever dare to suggest that Doom is story driven?
only the first Doom we're talking about.
Yeah, the
Oh,
original Doom.
yeah, no,
I played a
there's barely any story, but like
Honestly, the
people's
newer
emotions.
Dooms almost make a mockery of the fact that there's story in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
They're
yeah.
not really story driven at all either.
You're just straight
The
up
new
kill,
ones
kill,
are
kill, go
kind of
through,
story
kill.
based, but you have to read through logs to know the story.
Wouldn't
Like
Doom
the
technically also count as like a bullet hell segment in a sense?
uh
Isn't it like a bullet hell kind of game?
It's
no,
it's a game with bullets in hell, but I don't think it's a bullet
Fair
hell.
enough. You know what? Fair enough.
it's not a bullet hell. It's not a bullet hell. A bullet hell is where is like Toho Adventures or like Sans' fight is like a bullet hell.
Would you? I don't know. I don't know if this is completely wrong, but I almost thought it was sort of dungeon crawler like. You just move from room to room, slaughtering people and picking up things till you get to the end.
Yeah,
I thought that.
basically.
I always kind of thought Doom was dungeon crawler like. Well, there weren't really any shooter genres back
I
then
wouldn't
because
I wouldn't really call because it didn't exist. Doom invented the genre. So no, I wouldn't call it quite a dungeon crawler because I think a dungeon crawler would tend to imply like that there's kind of an element of engaging with this space in a meaningful way. Whereas with Doom, there's a little bit of that, like finding health pickups and ammo pickups and stuff. But it's really just like go and get the ammo pickup, and there's like a little side room that you can do. It's mostly about clearing the side rooms. You could argue dungeon crawlers are like that too. Um, I don't know. It's a little bit iffy, depends on what you mean by it. Which is, by the way, which is why we do processes like this to identify core game pillars and then break them out. Because if we didn't do that, we would end up in a situation where I say I want to make a dungeon crawler, and then 3 different people have 3 different ideas of what that means. um, but
yeah.
but yeah, I would say like if we talk about something like Doom as not being story driven, to relate that back to Ghosts of Tsushima, there might be a much more sophisticated story in Ghost of Tsushima as opposed to in Doom. The question is the story, and this is what really defines whether it's a core pillar, is the story something that really is important in driving the gameplay? Or is it we need story of some kind so that players have some kind of context for what they're doing, but really they're just doing stuff.
Hmm.
Having story as a core pillar is different from having a good story. So which is Ghost of Tsushima? a game that has a good story or a game that is story driven. And there's like a spectrum here,
It's
right? It's not the, the Telltale stuff is on one end of the spectrum, or like a visual novel is on one end of that
I was,
spectrum. Ghost of Tsushima definitely isn't that far on the spectrum for sure, but is it all the way down to Doom? Like, where does it fall? And is it high enough that we would say, yeah, actually, I think the story is deeply important in driving player decisions?
um, I didn't play the game. I did watch a bit on it. I'd probably put it if you're going that way, probably like 30 or no 40 or 50 on the scale. If 100 is the Telltale games and 0 is Mario Bros. Um,
40th
then
percentile narrative focus.
yeah, like it's important and it might
Yeah.
make you, you know, if they set up a bad guy as some crazy, but you might be more cautious or something. But that's
Yeah, so
um,
this is a
yeah.
really
Are you thinking
crucial
about it?
distinction, because does there need to be a story, or does it need to be this story? Does that make sense? In a Telltale game, it needs to be this story, because if that story is different, the player decisions, the core player decisions, change. You're making different decisions, and the reason you care about those decisions is because of their implication in the story, right? And distinction is important because what happens is, as a player, you play a game, and the story is sort of the veneer, right? It's the first thing that you interact with. It provides all of the concrete, specific details of why you care about the things. But there's a deeper layer of what you care about and the decisions that you're making. Here's a great example. When you're playing like Skyrim, you're doing a quest, but the quest is just the excuse to go to a dungeon and kill some guys and get loot. Right?
Mhm.
Not many people would argue that Skyrim is really story driven.
Yeah.
You could change everything about the Skyrim story, and some of the visuals would change, the names
Oh, I have
people
a
have would
really
change, but
I, Dark Souls and Elden Ring isn't really story driven, are they?
probably
I
not.
think Elden Ring is really
Because
story driven,
a
but Dark Souls technically is.
the a lot of it is a lot of your story based stuff is in like your armors and weapons and stuff like that. A lot of the lore is on them.
Story, here's the thing. Story might in some cases drive development. So for example, if we have a relatively linear game and it's telling a story, then we know that like this area needs to be themed in a certain way, and we can make the design kind of feel that way too, and we can build around that. But Dark Souls probably isn't story driven, because when you get to an area, what are you trying to do? You're trying to kill stuff, get through the area, find stuff in the area, get to the boss and kill it.
Hmm.
That's what you're trying to do. As a player, that's really your fundamental motivation, right? Is to go kill. How do you
Yeah.
solve that problem? Go kill. Oh, well, first, what is the gameplay problem? Because there's always a problem, right? The gameplay always gives you a problem. Is the
Hmm.
problem story driven? Is your fundamental
No.
motivation story driven? Not really. They give you things to latch to, sort of connect your motivation to, so that that motivation becomes concrete. So that instead of go kill, go kill, go kill, it becomes, you know, kill the boss of this area because of some reason that might be narrative driven, but your fundamental motivation is go kill. So your motivation isn't really story driven. Is the problem the gameplay presents to you story driven? Second thing. Because the
I
problem
think
is the
so.
boss, right? The boss or the
Hmm.
enemies, or there's another goddamn poison swamp or whatever,
Oh
right?
my gosh, don't get me started with the
Right.
crystal,
The
not the
the gameplay
cursed
problems,
game.
the gameplay
Oh yeah.
problems are all relevant to like I don't want to die. I don't want to do this again. Right? I don't want to have to like restart the section, die, go back to the bonfire or whatever.
I don't
Or
want
it's
to go back to the bonfire and run through that entire session again.
so what's the gameplay? What do the gameplay problems come from? Where do the gameplay problems stem from in Dark Souls? They stem from gameplay challenge, right? Specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Now we
Yeah.
can sit down and define what that means in the context of Dark Souls, and that's a whole other thing. But high level, broadly speaking, the gameplay problems that you're encountering as a player come from the gameplay challenge. There's a challenge in the gameplay.
Mm-hmm. And it feels so rewarding to get past that challenge.
So after that, you progress, right? You overcome the gameplay challenge and you progress. And what are you rewarded with when you progress? Is it story?
Souls.
I mean, sometimes it's kind of story. There's a bit sometimes. But what would you say is the like archetypal reward for overcoming a boss?
Souls, or a weapon.
You get souls, yes. What else?
A weapon.
Sometimes.
Like a boss weapon.
Sometimes you get a weapon. Well, sometimes you get a soul that you can turn into a weapon like later.
And then there's a bonfire that you
A bonfire. Okay, you get a bonfire, so it represents like a new save point where you get basically a new checkpoint, and replenishing all your stuff, all your resources. And what else? There's another thing that you get. Very important. The one thing that you will always get in Dark Souls.
Somebody else I'm playing Dark.
Killing a boss in Dark Souls always represents one of two things: either the completion of an area, or the progression to a new area. Always. And really, the only reason sometimes it represents the completion of an area is because the game can't just go on forever. Sometimes things have to end. But it's really important, right? That there's always like, oh, I'm killing a boss. Why? To get access to the new area. Well, why do you care about that? To kill the next boss. Really? Right? There are different players. Yeah, there's different players that have different motivations, that they do want to identify more of those story elements. But if we were ranking the pillars in Dark Souls, we may or may not put story in the pillars, but I think you could definitely make an argument for not really bothering. Because
exploration, I feel, is definitely a big pillar, though, isn't it? Because of the fact that like you have certain parts of the area that kind of just you can't get through unless you explore or go to do something.
Maybe in Dark Souls it's a very different. Let me give you a little. You know what? Let's do a really quick little Dark Souls diatribe here, because this is fun.
I know.
This is a fun idea.
I know in Dark Souls exploration is one thing, because you might find a door that brings you back to the bonfire, or a shortcut, stuff like that.
We're definitely getting sidetracked here, but this is kind of a fun idea, so let's do it anyway. Let me remember when I quickly was when I gave you a really quick Hollow Knight level design, and it's like, yeah, that's basically how level design works in Hollow Knight. Let's do that for Dark Souls. Here's like a typical Dark Souls type design. Let's just go, here's a hallway. At the end of the hallway, there's like a room with an enemy in it. And you enter here. Well, this doesn't feel very Dark Souls, does it?
No.
Like, you might see an area that's vaguely like this in Dark Souls, but it doesn't feel archetypally Dark Souls, right? No. How do we make it feel archetypally Dark Souls? Well, here's what we can do. We want to add some challenge to how you traverse the space, and very specifically in how you pay attention to your environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to add like a little offshoot here. But we're still going to have the same thing, right? There's a guy here. He's very well lit. You can see him very clearly from here. Very obvious. And here, we're going to put an item. A shiny. We're going to call it a shiny, Because specifically in Dark Souls, they don't show you what the item is on the overworld, right? They just have the
No,
shinies. So you just know it's
They
something.
you just see like a soul or whatever. I think it's a soul.
I'm going to obscure the vision slightly from the player coming in so that it's not quite as obvious.
Meter trap.
So that as you come in, you can miss this. In fact, I'm going to bring this up even further. As you come in, you can miss it. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to obscure this even further. So I'm going to make this sort of flush with the wall so that it's more obscure. So this is harder to see. As you're coming in this way, this is kind of hard to see. But this is kind of obvious. In fact, let's undo some of this. Let's make this kind of obvious, right? So you come in. Let's make it even more obvious. You know what? I want it to be obvious, actually. I want this to be obvious. So let's put it back to what I had before. So there's a shiny that's quite obvious, right? Maybe there's even some like lighting here, and this is all dark. And then here you have really bright lights, really, really obvious. And maybe even behind that, there's like a big archway that clearly leads forward, right? And then we put an enemy right here.
I knew it.
So that as you come up, this really obvious thing, you go, ooh, a thing, blah. Combat. Now it's very Dark Souls.
Yeah, that is a Dark Souls thing to do.
So the reason it's very Dark Souls is because when we talk about exploration in Dark Souls, and this is why I went on this tangent, is exploration in Dark Souls, it represents a few things, but there's like 3 or 4 really archetypal Dark Souls exploration experiences. And one of them is, here's an exploration challenge. The exploration challenge is be very mindful of your environment. So when you are not mindful of your environment and you just go immediately toward the shiny, the game punishes you all the time. Not every time, but pretty frequently. And if you come up here and see this, if you really wanted to be super, super Dark Souls, you would have a little thing over here that was like kind of obscure also. That went over here and then maybe had like another shiny here. A small one. Just so that if you turn around when you're here, you see it. Because it draws you in. So it doesn't have to be anything big, just, you know, a few souls.
And then there's another enemy that punishes you, because that's how another Dark Souls thing that would be thing.
Well, now we have an option. We could do that again, right? We could do something like this where like an enemy falls from the ceiling or whatever. Or we can make a little platform here that you like go out on. And from here you can see that enemy.
Mm.
So if
And
you
so-
explore,
Yeah, that's another
It-
Dark Souls thing.
it shows you like, oh look, there's a thing. If there was an enemy on the roof here, it would just be on the roof in darkness, and if you just stop and look up, you'll see it, and you just like shoot it or whatever. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we've done some Dark Souls level design, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before-
Dark Souls like.
Whereas before it wasn't Dark Souls at all.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
one of the reasons, so when you talk about exploration as being a pillar in Dark Souls, right? Think about what you said about exploration in Dark Souls. What was it? It was I heard somebody be like, "Oh, definitely exploration. Exploration is definitely a pillar in Dark Souls."
Mm-hmm.
What? Where does that certainty come from? Well, really, what it comes from is the fact that all of these gameplay challenges that you deal with in Dark Souls drive the experience of the game, right? Like all of these are decisions that you make. You could just walk up to this guy and fight him and then move on. And we're fine with that. And the reason that we're fine with that is because another big, this would be an experiential pillar. I don't know if it would be a high level pillar, but definitely an experiential pillar of just like challenge, combat challenge, challenges, right? But the thing is, what we would do here is we have combat and exploration, but then at a very high level, we know we want to drive challenge in a very real way. So we use combat to drive challenge and exploration to drive challenge. So really, Dark
Mhm.
Souls is a game about challenge, and we do that through exploration and combat. In fact, we even do that in our story, don't we? We don't just tell you the
Mhm.
story. You got to figure that shit out.
Yep, you gotta figure that out through weapon descriptions, armor descriptions, item description.
So it's a really good example of focus in the game design, right? Everything is about challenge, everything. And we have to define every time we create a gameplay feature, how does this further the challenge of the game? In what way is this challenging? Every time. Which is also
Everything is
why
out to kill you.
in Hollow Knight we can say like Hollow Knight is like feels like a Souls like. Why does Hollow Knight feel like a Souls like? Well, you could point out like, well, you have a dodge, but the thing is, the weird thing about Hollow Knight is you don't have iframes on your dodge, which makes the dodge work in a very fundamentally different way.
You don't have iframes on your dodge? Because I thought like a lot of like people that do like absolute radiance and stuff like that go through enemies' attacks and stuff like that with the dodge.
I don't think so. You certainly don't in Silk Song. That's the one
I
I'm a
know you
bit
don't in Silk
more
Song, but
familiar
in
with.
in 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 Hollow Knight, I've watched like a bunch of speedrunners dodge a lot of their moves and stuff like
I
that
don't remember.
with
Maybe it's something
dodge.
you unlock or whatever. I don't know.
I think it was something you unlocked though.
But it's not part of the core gameplay then. You don't even have the dash when you
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing, you're making a lot more decisions about like positioning and stuff like that, right? You can like jump attacks, um, you can parry the attacks. There's a lot of, I realize these mechanics technically exist in Dark Souls, but those are a lot more central, and the way that you know that they're central is that if you remove those elements from the game works just fine. And we know that that's true because that's the way the first like hour of the game works. Is that. And so you have these things. These actually, if you break them down to these little details, you notice that Dark Souls and Hollow Knight are actually very different games in these mechanical nuances. So what makes Hollow Knight what makes it feel reasonably accurate to call Hollow Knight a Souls like? It's not in the level design. It's not in the core mechanics of the game.
It's the challenges and stuff like
It's
that.
in the fact that every single part of the game is justified by virtue of answering the question, in what way does it challenge you?
Mhm.
Same thing that Dark Souls does. Anyway,
Okay.
that's a that's a whole tangent. That was just interesting because you can take these principles and like it's just interesting, but also I thought it might be useful to sit down and say like, look, understanding the sort of shape that the gameplay is supposed to take. This is, I wanted to give like a real concrete example of a thing that I can do as a designer. That's a valuable thing to be able to do as a designer as a result of understanding games in these like broader shapes, right? Like I can just design a Dark Souls level that feels like a Dark Souls level, or a Hollow Knight level that feels like a Hollow Knight level. The kinds of things that a designer should be able to do is understand like, oh, this is like the point. I'm sure I'm never going to be as good at it as people who actually design for these games, and probably there are level designers who are specialists in level design who would do it better than me. But it I can do it a bit, and the reason I can do it a bit despite not being a level designer is just because I understand gameplay in these like broad shapes and how they kind of fit together. And so that's what these exercises are about, is learning how to do those things. So when we talk, let's bring this back to Ghost of Tsushima. And after all of that, talking about all of these different things and like, oh yeah, like exploration seems like a big important part of the Dark Souls level design, or Dark Souls game design. We know we talked about story driven games and like not story driven games. What would you say are the pillars of Ghost of Tsushima? Now, would you change them? Change your answer.
Yes, I would. I
What
would
would they?
change
What
my
are they?
answer. I would take off story from the actual game pillars and
Okay.
switch things around as you had explained before. I would put exploration in game pillars because it's more major than story. Story is technically still a pillar, but it's not a major one. It's
So, what would you say if you had to like order them, top to bottom? First priority, first thing is the most important one, and every time you add a pillar, like there's no such thing as pillars that are equally important. This is not strictly true in games generally, but the reason that we're gonna assume that it is because the main way that you can make it so that you can have 2 or 3 pillars that are roughly equally important is by having a big budget and a giant team. You don't have that. So we're gonna do this more from an indie perspective of uh, prioritizing pillars in a very harsh way, where no 2 pillars are ever equal. Which means if you decide that the pillars are exploration, combat, and story, what's the top pillar, with the most important pillar? Your 30-second gameplay prototype of Ghost of Tsushima. What's the one thing you pick?
Oh, combat. If I need to show 30 seconds or get somebody to play 30 seconds of Ghosts of Tsushima, it would be a combat counter, I think. Just having, I mean, if you walk around the open world, it's cool, but you only have so much time to show people combat is what I would want to show. That's the most exciting, and probably in a combat game has the most thought put into it in terms of polish and all that.
Anybody disagree?
No.
no, no.
Okay, cool. What's the second
Really.
pillar?
That would be
Um,
exploration, I think, is combat exploration, and the last one would probably be with it would be story.
the
Because
second most
if I'm being honest, most times you're mostly just fighting and exploring than you are doing the actual story most times. Because the more that I thought about it, yeah. So if it was anything that you're changing, it would I guess in my opinion it would be that exploration would be the second one and story would be last on the pillar
So that's really handy
for those
because
three.
one of the reasons, by the way, I want to point this out. One of the reasons this is so very useful and very practical. I'm going to go back to my Dark Souls design. So if we used the same pillars that you just did, and we put them in order, let's just say, for the example of whatever this is, combat's the highest priority, exploration is the second highest priority, and then story is the last one. In that order.
Mhm.
Well, this area is geared up toward fighting this, like, scary enemy, right? We want to spend most of our time prototyping this enemy. We want to make sure that enemy feels really good to fight, has an interesting challenge to it. The actual I am fighting this enemy loop is really, really clean. The enemy's nicely polished. The combat here feels really, really nice. In terms of the level design, we worry about the environment for the enemy, and that you're fighting the enemy in. But that's about it, right? Only worried about the level design insofar as it affects the combat, right? Because combat is our main pillar. Incidentally, can anybody look at this and assume Dark Souls gameplay? Can anybody look at this and tell me one really huge problem with the level design here? It's actually very simple, but kind of a disaster.
Looks pretty tiny, tiny
Why would that be
battle
a
area.
problem?
Isn't Dark Souls all about rolling and dodging? I mean, people usually call it roll slop. Is there enough room to roll around? How big is the player in this space?
Well, we can just. I didn't really do this to scale, but we can just say this big.
I guess it's not the worst.
But
Yeah,
also,
that other.
small spaces can be a challenge of their own.
Yeah.
I guess.
What a problem is in this
There's
one right now.
there's one really glaring problem here, which is solved entirely through level design, through just spatial design.
But yeah, you can see the enemy kind of at the start of the path. Would you want to do like a curve there?
Why would I want to do this, and what negative consequences might this have?
What do you mean negative like makes the game worse or puts the player in a tougher spot? Because that's not necessarily. What do you mean by worse?
Well, in this case,
They could
this.
see it from the from exploration.
Yeah, do you remember at the very beginning when you designed this initially? Seeing this guy right at the beginning was actually
Oh,
a
yes.
really important part of the level design because it's there really visually front and center. It's well lit, it's well framed. We want it to be like really front and center in the composition so that as you come in, that's like the focal point. Then that's what makes these things feel more exploratory because you're not focused on them, right? You're focused on a different thing. And instead of going, remember in Amnesia, we talked about this. Here's the big thing that you're focused on, and you decide not to go there. And so that's what made it feel like exploration.
Yeah.
So the same principle is at play here. So if we turn this, oops, I messed with history. So if we turn this, we break that, right?
Yeah, because now they'd be curious of what's over there as well,
Yeah.
so they'd be going to look around and see.
Yeah, this whole compositional thing no longer works at all. And this whole design might completely fall apart. I don't know. It might though, because you come in and this is maybe the first thing you see, and it's like, okay, well, there's probably like you're just not distracted in any capacity, so we don't really get the experience that we want. What's an advantage of doing this though?
Uh,
Make it
it
more
might take
honest.
the. Yeah, it would probably catch the player off guard if they didn't go to that little side area and caught that.
Okay, so we shift the experience to being a little bit more of a not quite a jump scare, but like it kind of similar kind of thing. It's like, oh, there's a big enemy here. Okay, yeah, well, that's one thing. We'd have
I
to
mean,
retool the whole
yeah.
level design around that, probably, right? To make sure that that happens and to like build you up for it, and the rest of the level would have to change. Think about the tools you have access to in Dark Souls.
Hmm. Uh, I don't know what tools you have access to. Everyone else sounds like they've played a lot more Dark Souls than me.
I don't think of what exactly you mean by the tools they have access to, because
As a player, what can you do to solve problems?
like the Are you talking about like tools as in like the environment?
Just
In a
no, just like
sense?
in the gameplay, you have things that the game lets you do, or things that items they give you, options they give you, mechanics that exist,
Oh, okay.
interactions of mechanics, the gameplay tools of like how the things that it gives you to overcome the gameplay obstacles.
Okay. Hmm.
Isn't each? I don't know. I guess that's not what you mean.
It's kind of funny because
But
everybody does this. Almost everybody I've seen does this at some point, or has at least thought about it.
each build is different. I don't know what.
Weapons, builds, stuff like that. Magic.
Okay, what if you come in here with a sword and nothing else? This works out
You're probably
okay.
going to dink off. You're probably going to dink off the wall a few times.
Nah, I mean the space isn't that tiny. I think you'd be okay with a
Oh,
sword.
not that tiny.
I think you'd be
Okay.
alright with a sword. What if you came in here with a
With a
bow?
sword, you'd be able to aggro the boss from here and make it just
You have
cheese it
range.
You can just sit here
and
and
just
shoot it.
cheese it. Yep, just shoot it, and it'll run towards you, and then it'll
So
probably hit a barrier that won't
what's the
make
way
it
that
come out of that room.
what's the way that we can solve that?
Fog
Put a
wall.
giant door in front of it.
That too.
Now you can't cheese it.
Oh, that's I mean, there's also like the fact as well, but
Like in Dark
yes,
Souls 2, there's a boss that's literally in an open space, and people do that all the time. Just use the bow to shoot
Yeah,
him.
of course. You could also add doors. You could also do the
Yeah.
fog wall thing. If it's a boss, you can do the
Maintain it.
fog wall thing. Thing
Mhm.
is, problem with the door. Here's the problem with the door. You walk up, you open the door. Now it's the same.
Charles,
Oh,
Hey, sorry.
wow.
I thought you were on vacation or not vacation, somewhere, not around here, or not at your setup or something.
I was trying for an extension cord, because didn't have like a socket for the laptop that I had, the charger I had.
Hmm.
Yeah, that took a while. Sorry.
Well, okay. So we have a door. We can add a door, and that's cool because that solves that problem until it doesn't anymore, right? What if you fight the enemy and die and come back? Now you just have the hallway that you can choose again. It's the exact same thing, right?
Mhm. So make
So,
it a turn.
well, see, this is the thing: is I'm not necessarily saying therefore make it a turn because the turn has all the problems that the rest of the that it has now, right? We talked about what
Mhm.
problems come from
Yeah.
doing this, right? We know that there's going to be some
Yeah.
problems that this causes. It undermines most of the rest of our level.
Mhm.
Can we solve that in some way? Can we fix that problem with either with a different solution for the boss or the big enemy, or some other way, hypothetically, potentially, ideally, without changing a bunch of stuff? We want to make the smallest change that we can really get away with.
Make it so it can run on the entire way down.
Well, you could do that, but you can still kite it down the thing.
Jesus.
You get into some weird situations where now does it aggro you all the way down the thing, because now all of the exploration gets undermined too.
True.
You could make it so like every time when you fight it, if you die, door closes again, or like something happens, or something appears that you can't choose it.
You could do that. We could make it a boss and make it a fog gate. That solves that problem. But
Yeah.
Mhm.
that
If it's
really
just a
changes
normal
the
enemy, I don't know.
yeah, that really changes the because what if we have a boss like later in the level? We don't want like random we don't and the thing is too, we can't go every time we have this problem or a problem like this, we just make it a boss and now the game has 800 bosses.
You could just like also technically kind of
Instead of making
say
it
it's a
like an
boss, but it's a
open,
mini boss.
instead of making it an open view, make it like are we inside a building or are we like outside on like a castle wall type thing?
Let's call this a cave to make it kind of simple.
A cave? Okay.
I don't know.
What? I guess it doesn't. I guess it doesn't matter. But you'd be able to earlier in a level, you'd be able to see that enemy through going to a different passage in the cave. I guess there's a hole in the wall or something.
Can
Well, let's
Doesn't
can
be
doesn't
careful.
matter.
Don't lose sight of our goal. Remember when it was like this? I did too many things. When it was like this, why was it like this? What was the purpose in putting the boss here, down the hallway?
Was to, I guess, create the tension and also make the player decide whether they want to continue forward or turn around and look around first.
Well, we wanted something visually prominent, right? That was really important.
mhm.
Very, very important that we made this super visually prominent. So what do we lose by doing this?
Not visually prominent, it's more so just another thing that they would get curious about to look around.
It's
look
just
at,
a hallway.
I
A
guess.
So
thing a
what's
thing
another
you can
solution here?
do is put a spawn point somewheres.
Where?
A spawn point somewheres in the cave. Maybe where the visual is for the little guy.
you 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 walk
Where
over to like the end of it and you see that auto save.
you know you know you could always put a bonfire in front of the room.
I
There's
feel like
uh,
everybody's thinking way too big. I would solve this in such a simple way. What did we lose when we change the enemy?
visual of
Compositionally,
him.
we lost the really important visual
Visual.
of the boss. Is a big enemy the only thing we can possibly use to have a big visual
No, you
in the
could have
composition. You
okay,
just
so
slap
you're
something
in
else
a
in there.
so we're making it so you can see that enemy. If you can see the main, let's just call it a boss. It doesn't that matter that much. You can see the main boss enemy through that little corridor, like that. Like if you go to that side area, that first side area, you can see both, right?
At a smaller enemy?
There's two enemies, right? Is there not?
It's mini boss.
Just
What?
just put another item there.
We just needed something. We just needed something. Remember, we just needed something visual. Doesn't have to be an enemy.
Yeah.
We just need something really well lit and really well framed. We can put like a little,
Yeah.
open
Okay.
archway
Put the
here.
item
So
there.
there's another thing that Souls does is put a smaller enemy right there too, and it will still work that way too.
Could use an enemy. In fact, what we can do here is we can even make this very put like another
Very
enemy
big
right
for
here.
there to be an enemy. Yeah. So like the moment you walk around and
Yeah.
you go over to where that thing is, and unless you were cautious enough, you looked around the corner, you wouldn't see that enemy until it attacks you.
Yeah,
Because
and now
the
we have
player
to.
would be like, "Ooh, shiny," and then just gets hit.
Yeah.
You know the Peter Griffin. Ooh, look, $1.
Oh yeah. Oh look, $1. Boom. Yeah. But
So that's
it could be
anyway.
that.
That's again a little bit of a tangent, but like this is. I like doing these exercises. They're fun, and also, God, if you're a level designer, this is your whole job. Is this?
Fun. No, just kidding.
This is all you do. Well, I mean, you build. You also build, but you have to like identify. You would do paper designs and identify like what you're doing and why you care about it, and well, what's the experience? Crucially, like at a high level, to apply to more than just level design, this is how you would walk through the process of designing something. For a level, you want something visual, so I'm drawing it. But for like mechanics or gameplay systems, you're writing out how those systems work, but it's exactly the same thing. You're like mapping it out and figuring out how they work together. And crucially, to go all the way back, all of this stems from this idea that we have certain pillars. Because if we don't adhere to our high level pillars, like imagine our highest level pillar was story. None of this matters. None of this matters.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
This
you're
is
not finding any of this.
so relevant.
None of it.
If our pillar is story, we probably do have this kind of thing. Maybe we have a couple little offshoots, but then you go up and then there's a boss here. But then we do have a door. And we have a door because that way you have this big like climactic moment where you reveal the boss. And then over here we can have like an item. We can even still have an item and like an enemy kind of setup going on here. But we want, we care about it being a really cool reveal. Whereas here, the reveal is almost incidental, or it feels almost incidental, where you're doing other things. You want this item, and then, oh my god, a guy.
Mm-hmm.
And also, oh my god, a guy.
Yeah.
Like, there's just a lot. So we're constantly, we're just trying to, like, build tons of challenge out of the design. Whereas with this other one, we're not building challenge. We're trying to establish pacing. And maybe there's like maybe if you're fighting like a commander of an enemy army or whatever, there's like flags as you walk up, right? There's some environmental storytelling here. There's like this goes into like a side room where there's something barracks or something. That makes no sense here, but you'd have a lot more emphasis on building the whole shape around telling that story versus here we're more trying to create the narrative of player experience, right? As a player, you come into here, you see this thing, and then you make these decisions, and then you get punished for doing this, not doing it that way. You feel kind of rewarded if you check around the corner, and if you explore here, it tells you like and it's all about creating challenges, but then also giving players methods of mitigating or circumventing or overcoming those challenges. because challenge is the goal. So understanding that high level focus totally changes the way you design everything else. So while going through this whole exercise definitely isn't important in practicing understanding pillars, it is really useful in illustrating why knowing your pillars is really important. Understanding what the priority is and understanding what's driving the design. What is it? Is it story? In which case, Telltale games are a great example of driving the game with story. Everything a Telltale game does is driven by story. Everything. What's the decision that you're making in any given moment? Well, it only matters in the context of story and character stuff that you've been getting throughout the game. So if you miss that stuff, or you don't pay attention, if you skip all the dialogue in a Telltale game, those decisions don't mean anything to you.
No, the game is. There's absolutely nothing other
you
than.
you actually can't make those decisions anymore. In some cases, right? Because the context, you just don't have the context. Whereas in Dark Souls, if you ignore all the story, you still make all. If you ignored all of the story elements and all the world building elements in Dark Souls, this still works. This whole thing works just fine. It might not have quite the same flavor to it as if you know that this is the ghost of a soldier who died in a tragic, because of course it's tragic, sacrifice that ultimately amounted to nothing, and now his ghost prowls the cave because of some sad reason. You know what I mean? And then you get his sword at the end of it. Whatever. And you go, oh, this is the sword of this guy. And then in the text description, it references some other guy. And you're like, oh my God, I know that guy. And they were comrades in this war. Like you can have that in a Dark Souls game and it adds some flavor. It adds like some spice to it. But if you don't have any of that, if you don't pay attention to any of that, you still get this whole experience of like creeping through the space and that feeling of danger, the feeling of being like having your focus drawn, and then finding these side paths and feeling rewarded for finding those side paths and using your bow, like cheesing this guy from this platform that like maybe looks down on that area, so there's some elevation there and you can use your bow to like cheese him, and now the cheese feels really gratifying. Whereas before the cheese eliminated the challenge. Whereas here, now you have a guy and the challenge is exploration based. Because this guy isn't hard to fight, right? This guy isn't hard to kill. He's a little guy. He's easy to kill. The problem with him is that he's hidden. So if you don't see him, you'll have problems. So that's an exploration challenge, not a combat challenge. You see the difference in how we define that challenge. It's exploration. It's about pattern recognition of, oh, they gave me an item, there's probably some shit. So you look around and you find the guy and you're like, I see you. And then you kill him and it's easy. Or there's another path here. You find the little platform and you look down and you can shoot him with the bow. So now cheesing the guy with the bow is gratifying because the game sort of implies that it's trying to cheat you. So being able to cheese the guy feels really gratifying, and it doesn't undermine anything because it's an exploration reward or an exploration challenge. Whereas the enemy here is a combat challenge specifically. So we don't want you to use exploration to defeat this challenge. We want you to use combat to defeat this challenge. And then the whole level like contorts around that. I think there's probably still plenty of problems with this level. But that's okay. Okay, all right. That was a fun tangent because that's what design is this.
Corey,
Well, this is what
do
level
we have
design
you
is.
for game design? Do we have you for game design, or is this someone else?
Me? Look.
Yeah, because I've noticed that I just looked at the schedule and we have 3 classes today. It looks.
Oh, do you? You have an evening class. I guess you have to do makeups, huh?
Yeah, game design and game art fundamentals.
Oh yeah, Colin's game
art fundamentals was Colin, but hold on, Colin had the homework for us. That's not doing this class because that was 3D modeling homework, I believe.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have to write something. Anyway, that was sidetrack. Never mind.
I'm having a hard time with the hilt of the sword. So
Same. Just like the size of it.
Same.
Okay,
Mhm.
let's put this aside and move on. We'll do the next ones hopefully a little bit faster. We'll go through these quick. All right, let's do the next. Who wants to do their game pillars? The game pillars they critiqued next.
well,
Did I do mine?
oh, you can go.
Hey, because you had me do Tristan's, which was Undertale, and I mean I've played through it, and I will say I do agree with most of the things that Tristan said, but I will definitely say that platform is not really a major pillar at all. It's mostly been like kind of put in Stan's fight when you're doing his battle, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
not
Platforming it.
really a major thing. It's barely ever actually used at all in Undertale. It's not really. I feel as though like when you're even if you had even if that I feel as though if you removed platformer, it wouldn't really ruin the integrity of the game.
Yeah, I think
Personally,
platforming is used in 3 different encounters, and 2 of them don't exist on the same story route.
The spider lady with
yeah,
the like the purple heart
That's
thing.
not
The is
that's
that
not
platforming?
platforming. That's like it's almost like Subway Surfers. She locks you to rails.
Oh, okay.
It's not the blue platforming that under
yeah. That
what's
when
his
you're
name?
fighting seances.
Yeah, yeah.
Other than that, I mostly agreed with like what Kristen had to say on like the pillars. I just don't feel as though that platforming was a is really much of a pillar that could actually be there because it's only in one segment of a fight, and that was
Sure.
Sans. And even if you I feel as though even if you took that away, it wouldn't really ruin much of the integrity of like the fight or the game itself. Now I could be wrong. I could be very wrong actually, but that was just
No,
on
I
my critique.
I think that's the right idea. I think yeah.
Yeah, I think
There was one pillar I
that's
forgot
mine.
to put, and it was exploration. So
Yeah, there's definitely that. I did forget to mention that in it as well. Yeah, but yeah, that, that's my critique right now. Is what I put and what I was like swinging for that. But that's really it.
What?
all right.
How would we define Undertale's pillars, and what are they driven by? Like Dark Souls has combat, exploration, maybe story, maybe, and it's all challenge based.
If you choose to do it, um, it technically be more so just in the sense of as it's like definitely there's definitely combat in it, but that is I believe one of the major pillars. But I'm trying to think.
Do you make decisions in the combat that are different based on your understanding of what's happening in the
Yes.
story?
Well,
No, no. It's most. I
is
think
it
it's
like
whether you like the character or not is if you choose to spare or mercy or kill them. You don't. Uh, I don't. I
It's
don't know.
doing what he
Maybe.
just asked for. That's what he asked for. Is if it like
yeah?
changes the
Is like
story or
yeah.
whatnot. Does
I guess
combat
so.
change
I
the
guess yes.
story?
I guess yes. Then I would
So
say it does.
combat is probably mechanically or like systemically the core of the game, right? In terms of the core gameplay, it's the combat. Again, if you're doing a 30-second prototype, and you were doing Undertale, you probably prototyped the combat, right? If you just had to pick one
Mhm.
Yeah.
thing. But then story might be a higher pillar here because you actually make decisions in the combat that
For different
come
outcomes of the story.
from specifically
No,
your
technically.
understanding of the narrative, like reading the dialogue and paying attention to what the implications visually in the scene are and things like that, change how you interact in the combat. And if you decide, how does it work? If you decide to spare someone versus kill them, the gameplay changes, right? It's like a different gameplay
Different
challenge.
route.
Mhm.
And how does the last boss work?
Depends on
Sans?
who you spared or killed or not.
Or are we talking about Sans? Because Sans is technically not the last boss.
It doesn't matter.
Mm.
The final boss of the game pretty much just whatever boss most represents the differences in how mercy and kill work
Okay,
in
so it
one
would be
combat.
Sans. It would be Sans.
Also,
He oh yeah.
what's his name?
Flowey,
Uh,
Asgore.
no,
Wowie,
Asgore, that guy.
Asgore.
So why is it an important moment when he breaks the mercy thing?
Because you're like,
Uh,
oh shoot, I cannot spare him for the ending I want if you're trying to do the
So
mercy
so
ending.
that has story implications, but what are the gameplay implications? It also has gameplay implications. What are the gameplay implications?
well, in order to even get to Asgore, you must have spared at least one person. So it, if I don't know, what would it do? It would kind of
Believe you
make
fight
it so you
Asgore in
have
every
to do
route.
combat. Acting doesn't do anything because the entire point of the act menu is to turn the name yellow so they can be spared. So it really makes so you have to do combat. There's no
Yeah.
pacifist Asgore fight. It's
Let me
Asgore is a combat fight only.
let me ask you this: when you're in a fight and you press the mercy button, what happens?
If their name is yellow, the battle ends and they're spared, and if it's not, nothing happens.
Okay. So how do you turn their name yellow?
By using the
You
act button.
What
you
happens when you
yeah,
press that button?
it opens a sub
It gives
menu
you
and each enemy has
you
its own options.
some of
Or you
them will
get
be able to talk, some of them will be able to do other stuff.
What are some
or
of the things that you can do in that sub menu?
okay, here's an example.
Give me two
There's
different examples.
I don't know what the enemy's called, but there's an enemy that's themed around washing your hands in soap. Whatever, but its normal attack pattern is it flings little water droplets and you have to avoid them. If you go to your act menu and press the clean button, it does a alternate variation of the attack where it spits out green particles along with the white ones, and you have to collect the green ones. And then if you collect at least one, I think its name turns yellow and it can be spared.
So
And
so
another
combat
example is
combat is
Mhm.
essentially it gives you a little mini game,
Yeah,
and then depending on your decisions in the combat, the mini game changes, which means the mini
yeah,
games can be more difficult, right? Like once you press the act button, sometimes the mini game changes to be harder,
hmm
which is interesting because that means that you have to actually be driven to want to do the thing. So that kind of eliminates this idea that um as a player I'm just going to take the easiest path to victory. The easiest path to victory is basically just murder everything.
yeah,
Which means
yeah. The
mercy is really about understanding story implication, or it's about the narrative. It's actually really connected to the narrative in a significant way because your
yeah,
motivations are driven by that.
I think Undertale is one of the best examples of. Um, I mean, the only thing better would be a Telltale game, but I think Undertale is a really good example of making every decision count.
Well, it's an
There's, I mean,
example
how
of
many?
tying story to gameplay structurally, which is neither a
Yeah,
virtue nor a sin. It's just a it's a lateral move, right? It's different. You can do that. there are players who don't care about story at all. And
No, that's true.
and you know, if you're a competitive StarCraft player, you do not care who Jim Raynor is. You don't care. You
Right.
care
Well,
about
yeah.
your build order. um
Um, but not every game is made for every type of person. So the demographic that would love Undertale, would probably like Undertale more than most other games that have similar pillars. I think out of any game
Maybe.
that has Undertale's pillars, Undertale is the best use of those pillars.
Maybe.
Does that make more sense?
Uh, the the really important takeaway I think for us is to think about, okay, this actually whereas with Ghost of Tsushima we really drilled down into story's really not that important. It's not as important as you'd think. Like after playing the game, when you really start looking at it more structurally, you start to realize like it's actually the story doesn't really drive that much, and it's just not as important in the structure of the design as you might initially imagine. Whereas with Undertale, we did the exact opposite happen. Where it's like actually the story kind of is an important driving force. It's still not quite to the same extent that something like a Telltale game is, maybe, but definitely an important. Where you put Ghost of Tsushima at around 40th percentile on that spectrum. This is maybe like 80th, 85, 90. It's like way higher. It's probably still not all the way up there, but it's way higher. And obviously, this is a very rough sort of estimate sort of tool, this weird spectrum thing. But it's a useful way to just sort of frame like, okay, it's more. The story does more to drive your decision making. So it probably is a reasonably high pillar. It might even be something like combat, story, exploration. Exploration might be the least important thing.
Hmm.
So then, if you're talking about
Um,
the gameplay more specifically, again, driving down to this idea of, okay, if we were prototyping it, combat first. Do we add the mercy system in that combat prototype? Is it important enough?
somebody else who's played the game. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, imagine the game without it. Imagine the prototype, a combat game, combat thing. Basically, it becomes an 8-bit RPG where the combat is just this bullet hell type minigame.
Right. And that's the only thing. It would still be alright. Um,
Is that good enough, or is the mercy system important enough to include?
yeah, obviously, yeah, it is. It's Undertale wouldn't work without a mercy system, I don't think, or it wouldn't be as good. If like, it'd be a completely different game. I think if there was no mercy system, then the story uh would also be less important because there'd be no way to change it.
It kind of just becomes a generic RPG with a bullet hell gimmick, doesn't it?
Hmm. It
And
does,
maybe the
yeah.
story could be written well, but it's like just there. It's more in that Ghost of Tsushima camp now, where it's like it's there, but it's not really driving anything, right?
Right. I mean, the fact that the real ending is locked behind nothing but sparing
Right.
probably is all the tell you need.
And how do we know as a player? How do we make the decision about mercy versus not mercy? We know from
How do you know?
yeah, we know
What do you
from
mean? How do you,
like literally how do we make that decision? What information do we use to make that decision?
whether we like them or not? And I didn't spare a lot of people on my first round because the game was hard and I was really mad by the time I beat them. But I spared some of the lower end guys because uh, because I wanted to see what would happen. That's the decision I made behind it.
So it's basically a decision between like, do I want this person to live enough that I'm willing to go through the extra effort and challenge of
Right.
doing that?
Typically, yeah. Typically,
That's kind of the
sparing is
tension of the combat, right? That's like the core tension there. That's probably the core of Undertale is that decision.
yeah. Typically, sparing is more difficult than
Yeah.
killing, for at least for any important
Yeah,
boss.
and the story is basically about that, right? It's basically about, right? That's the whole determination theme.
Hmm.
The story is about doing the hard thing, doing the right thing even though it's difficult. That's what the story is about. So it's really really important. So in Undertale, story is a pillar. You could probably make an argument for Ghost of Tsushima that story is maybe not that much. Maybe it's not even a pillar at all. Maybe it's not like one of the core pillars at all. But with Undertale, I don't think you could make that argument, right? I think with Undertale, story has to be one of the pillars. Do you see what we did? We like really have to justify. In order for it to be a pillar, we really have to be able to justify it. And sometimes you can. But you have to really be able to justify it, right? So what are the Undertale pillars? What are we deciding?
The Undertale pillars are. I'm gonna say
Top to
combat
bottom,
because if you,
or
yeah, most important to least important.
Yeah.
I would say story, combat, exploration.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna do combat because if you just encountered a character in the overworld and you got a spare kill option, that'd be kind of there'd be no impact to that. So I'd say in my order would be combat, the mercy system, puzzles. I guess what those are the top. I think those are my pillars.
That should be exploration, right, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I guess that would fall under exploration. You explore and
Yeah.
find
You could
puzzles, and
you
then
could
the
call it
puzzles allow you to. Yeah.
exploration is
Okay.
kind of a convenient one because it can mean a lot of things. um
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
it becomes very important if you're putting exploration as a game pillar to really clearly define what you mean by exploration because it can be so vague. But generally speaking, this idea of like looking around and poking around and like a shore. Um, yeah, I would tend to agree with combat then story then exploration if exploration is going to be in there. And the way that I would justify that is I would make the comparison again to Telltale. Like Telltale is a situation where I'd put story first. Story is first in Telltale for sure. There is an example of story is the top pillar because everything else, you even get to the point in a game like Telltale, you even get to the point where you're like, we don't even care if there's combat or any kind of like core mechanic like that. There just isn't one. Right? If there's combat in a Telltale game, it's you get into a scenario where the main character has like a gun pointed at somebody else and you just have a decision of whether to shoot or not. Right? That's combat.
Yeah. No. The combat in Telltale it's yeah it's quick time or arcade style
Very, very
like
simple.
we yeah. Mhm.
Very simple.
I would not put combat in a 30
No.
second
No.
preview.
No, you could totally have a Telltale game that feels completely like a Telltale game and never have a combat section. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do the next one. Who's next?
I will go next.
Cool.
I believe. It's The Witcher. There was a few things I did agree with his document here, which is story, exploration, challenges and replayability. I didn't really agree with because unless you're a person who wants to get like every single ending, I don't really see the replayability part, and I didn't really see any challenging parts for The Witcher 3.
Did who picked The Witcher?
It was Charles.
Okay. Yeah.
Like story is 100% like the main focus of this game is trying to find someone. At the moment, I didn't watch the whole gameplay because it was 33 hours long. Uh, but uh, with the hour, like the 2 hours I watched of it, it was more story and gameplay based more than anything.
Well,
Yeah,
again,
what?
make the comparison, right? If we're gonna set the bar at Telltale game is a game where story is the first pillar, does The Witcher 3
Um,
meet the same standard of story is the first pillar?
no.
If
I
you
think
if you
exploration would be the
removed
first pillar.
if you removed or drastically reduced the story elements in The Witcher, but kept all the combat, you still go fight a griffin or whatever, but the game was all, I don't know, let's say the game was nothing but like there's a board and you take a quest and you go do the hunt and you go kill the griffin and you come
Well,
back. And
that's
that was the
really
whole game.
hard
That.
because combat in this game was almost as much as the story
Was
when
it
I was
almost as
watching it.
much as? Because I would say it was a lot more. In The Witcher, combat's way
It's
more
a lot.
important than story.
Is it way more?
I would say so. Because that's what you do, right? Again, think about it like in the context of, same thing as in the context of Ghost of Tsushima, right? We really drilled through that and came to the same conclusion of like, really, what matters. Yeah, again, 30-second prototype of The Witcher 3. What are you doing?
True.
Telling a story?
Uh,
Nah, probably killing a griffin, right? Something like that.
killing monsters. Yeah. So combat would be definitely up there then. Which I think I did have that as my first
The funny
pillar.
thing is, it turns out when you start breaking these things down structurally, pretty much all third-person action RPGs have the same
Same thing, yeah.
same order of the
Combat.
same three pillars: combat, exploration, maybe story. I would say
True.
story is more important in The Witcher than it is in Ghost of Tsushima because it affects your
Mhm.
decisions a little bit more. But
Yeah, there's different dialogue and stuff like that to change the game and stuff like that.
Like, would you put it at like a 55, 60%? I feel like that. I haven't played The Witcher, but I need to play more games.
I
But I
think
feel
that's
like that sounds
actually
about right.
I think that's overselling it, honestly, because like they do some to
Really?
integrate it to the gameplay, but it's not really. It's not like there are some instances where like you'll fight a different boss or something, which would put it higher. What I would say is it probably occupies more in that 35-40% range, and then Ghost of Tsushima is probably actually more like 20% because you don't really nothing changes. You know what I mean? Nothing changes about anything in Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima's story is basically just there to punctuate boss fights and create like emotional context. It's like movie-esque. Do you know what I mean? The story. It's not really an integral component of the gameplay. I mean these are kind of arbitrary 20th, 40th percentile. It's kind of arbitrary, whatever, doesn't really matter. But yeah, I would put The Witcher as story is more important than it is in Ghost of Tsushima, which is really important because it's a good example of highlighting the distinction between when we're thinking about the game structurally versus sort of what it feels like. Because if you have a game that just tells a really interesting story, from a player perspective, you're gonna feel like the story was important because it's important to you. Do you know what I mean? Like it mattered to you because you liked it, you connected with it, and that's just a very different perspective. And this exercise, since this exercise is specifically about a more structural approach, we're somewhat inappropriately disregarding the emotional approach. Not because it's not unimportant from a grand perspective. We're just trying to focus specifically on the structure for educational purposes because that's the point.
So the pillars for The Witcher would be combat first, then story, or exploration.
Is The Witcher an
Yeah.
open world game?
Yes.
It's an
Okay.
open world game.
This sounds. I mean, obviously, if you write it like this, they sound similar. But it almost sounds like a slightly more story relevant or story important Ghost of Tsushima game, open world combat story game.
The Witcher does
So
seem to be more story focused than
yeah,
exploration.
like, is there any alternate paths in? I mean, there might be one ending, but in Ghost of
Well,
Tsushima, I don't.
yeah, you
There's
can.
different endings for The Witcher. There's like 7 to 10 of them.
There's a really simple
Uh,
way to do this comparison, which is in The Witcher 2. Is The Witcher 2 an open world game?
No.
Is it still The Witcher? Does it still feel like The Witcher?
Yes.
All right, the exploration probably isn't super important to the Witcher series. It definitely changes things in terms of the open world, adding definitely an exploration element that wasn't there in Witcher 2, obviously. So it changes in The Witcher 3. You're gonna have slightly different pillars, but yeah, I think it's probably fair to say combat, story, exploration. If you remove the story elements from The Witcher 2, the moral decisions that you make as Geralt, it stops feeling like The Witcher. And some of this is because it's drawn from the novels, right? So it's actually very important in the game to kind of get the character right, and you do that through these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So the pillars shift a little bit because we want to make sure that like fans of The Witcher recognize the characters as the characters, and that becomes very important now because of that context. So probably story is second. Yeah, I'd say probably combat, then story, then exploration, which is interesting because stories usually people put story higher than it probably should be structurally, but in this case I would put it as second. I mean, again, it's a little bit arbitrary because at the end of the day all that matters is, do we have a structure that makes sense that will like drive decision making in our development later? But yeah, I think so getting into the minutia of that is not super important. I think you could probably get away with story third in The Witcher 3 since the open world does. You could probably make different arguments, but those probably are the pillars. Yeah, it's a bit of an easier one. Let's do the last one. Let's do the last one so we can start the really boring stuff. What was the last game?
I
Zardy's
picked
game.
Yeah, I picked Zardy's Maze, and Charles got that one, I believe.
All right.
Um, Zardy's maze. From what I've seen, like his game pillars, I think I agree to most of them. Would be exploration. I mean his wording is a bit different. But I'm assuming it'll just come down to explore and in combat, and I, I don't. I mean, I don't want. I don't. I'm not sure if I want to say challenges because there is challenges. I don't know if, I- but there is challenges, so I'll say that. I'm. Then again, I'm not really sure if that's what he meant. Um, but yeah, because like Zarda's game maze, it's like in you have to like explore and then you have to like find this three plants that you have to destroy, and then after that you have to look for the exit to survive. But at the same time there's like enemies hunting you, so you gotta know what their weaknesses and stuff, or if you can fight them. You have like a flashlight that you can use to stun some of the enemies, and then you also have like I I think it's like a hatchet, I believe. Um,
Yeah, you have the hatchet and
yeah,
the flashlight.
yeah. So you can kill some of them, I believe, but I don't. But it's not highly recommended. I think it forces you to ride. I mean, hide and run away instead. So, but yeah, for the most part, I think I agree for the most of the stuff he said. But
Put this
like I
here.
said, I just changed some of his wording.
Change some of my wording. Yeah, I did it in a weird way. All the most of the text in this document is actually a part of a picture. It's weird.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
it's fine, but like enemy piling up, I would say that's just falls under combat, and then like the first one is just exploration. Then I'd say the third one will be I don't would survival be count as a or I mean
Yeah,
that
probably.
I feel like that would fall part of it against.
Survival is probably a pillar. That could be a pillar in a game, sure.
Yeah, okay, then yeah, I'd say I want to say challenges or survival. It's either those two, because there's
Yeah.
I feel like there's replayability. You can like, but then again, it's like random generated maps. So I don't know if that will fall under
Yeah,
replay. But
yeah.
yeah,
Replayability The game was updated to have almost like, and if anyone's ever played a Freddy's game, the custom night, it has that third picture is a screenshot of the custom run mode, and that would encourage replayability. But I think it is randomly generated, but there is like a campaign mode, and there's a few enemies that are like all the it's more scripted events in. I guess replayability. Oh yeah, there's a lot of strategy and of course the side mode. So maybe I should have put replayability. Maybe more important than what did I say? I said
Yeah,
you can't
cannot.
not being able to stay still, having multiple enemies at once in the same map, and obviously exploring a maze because you all know what mazes are. They're mazes. You got to explore them.
Oh, the Zardy's Maze is free.
Yeah, it's free to
Yeah,
play on
no, it's free.
Steam.
It's
Yeah,
really good. You should play it.
I played it for a bit and then like watch a couple videos of it. So yeah.
Its sequel just
So
came out,
try it
and
out
so
now.
no, yeah, try it out. Try it out. I highly recommend it. It's by a
Are you
YouTuber
talking about
too.
Zardy's Cave?
It's a
Zardy's Cave is the sequel. That costs like $10, but Zardy's Maze
it's a
has
free.
like and it has like N64 ish graphics, like an N64 Pro, and it's free. You try it out.
Yeah. Well, I just added it to my library, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I just changed some of this wording, but for the most part, I think I agree to what he said or wrote.
Would you change many of my pillars?
Yeah, did I changed just I mean I just like changed some of the wording. Uh like I said, I think the most important one is probably exploration, combat, and again, I'm not sure. I'd say put it survival,
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, the
but like
I got combat. Yeah,
I
combat
feel
was a
like
little misleading. Combat, you just have
yeah, I'd
defenses
say
against.
combat would definitely be the last because um but yeah.
I think I should have changed the word encounter. I should have changed the word combat to encounter because you don't fight any people, but you do come face to face and you can defend yourself. But
Like you can
it's
like definitely like stun them and then hide. Like you can hide in the bushes.
mhm.
Like, how do you know what
What
to
do you
do
mean?
when that
I
happens?
It doesn't tell you. I think that's why I said maybe it's replayability because like it forces you to learn their attacks or like what they do
Yeah,
and
I should have put replayability in.
you,
Is it
or
replayability? Because replayability would be like a roguelike is replayable, where
yeah
replayability is like a really core pillar. That's the
yeah.
iteration of it.
Yeah, it has
I
rogue-like
feel like it
elements.
would be other challenges then or
Yeah, I get would it count as replayability if it's a different challenge? Yeah, I say it would. Um, if you look
Well,
at on
replayability as
the
a pillar is basically the fact that you do the whole thing again is
yeah, yeah, that's
crucial
yes.
to the gameplay.
I would say yes. If you look at
so
the
yeah at least when it
third
comes to the
photo,
combat.
you can customize your own challenges. There's preset challenges where it's the same goal, but one time it's a complete blackout, and you have to, and the only light is the flashlight. There's ones where you don't have the axe, but it's the same mission. It's like a roguelike, but every run has like a mod installed or something.
Difficulty.
There's no Yeah, there's no high scores. Like it's not a roguelike, but it is replayable. And yeah, I described the flashlight as a main weapon. I guess that's what it is. That is
Yeah,
what it is.
you have two main weapons. It's a hatchet and a flashlight.
The hatchet is just. I think the hatchet could be replaced with any sort of tool. You can make the hatchet a crowbar, and nothing would really change. But the
Well, I
flashlight,
think I think they put hatchet because like you have to chop down the
Yeah,
thieves.
but could you beat a plant? Could you destroy a plant with a crowbar? Probably, like it would work. But the
It would work,
flashlight,
but
like,
it'll take longer.
yeah, I mean, but there are like elements of the like again, there's blackout runs where the flashlight is the only light. There's a lot of enemies are stunned by light. You need the flat the little the I guess all the character names are on the third picture. The pumpkin crawlers, what they do is they latch onto your feet and they stick out their vines in the pathways of the maze. And the only way to see them is if they're in light. And the model's actually completely invisible if there's no light on it. So you need the flashlight.
Yeah. Um,
So I would definitely change a few pillars around, but I hope I think I got the main idea of the game across.
Well, I'm not familiar enough with this game to comment.
Yeah, that's
um,
how I felt when you guys would ask me questions about The Witcher or something. I was like, oh, I don't know.
uh, it would probably be useful to do more of these with very different kinds of games to start to see how those pillars start to really differ, so that we don't have combat story exploration in like every game. uh,
I
but I think let's probably what we'll do is we'll start the writing exercise, and that'll be also homework for if it's not done. Your objective with this exercise is to write as complete of a description of a feature as you possibly can from any game. So you need to tell me what the game is, and then you pick a feature from the game, and then you just describe the feature in painstaking detail.
So, like, if I chose Titanfall and just went double jump,
Yeah, how in
I
depth
would
does this mechanic have to
I would
be?
definitely want something a little bit larger than double jump. This is remember if this is
Okay.
homework, you're expected to spend like 3 hours or so on this. So we'd probably be looking at a larger feature of the game. Um,
what do you mean
maybe
by
like
feature?
a what?
What do you mean by feature of the game?
A feature is just a component of the gameplay that's defined in whatever way is most relevant to the game. So an example of that might be like an upgrade system is a feature.
I see.
Some you can also go really low level with features. We're gonna keep these relatively high level. We're not gonna do anything like I don't know. We're not gonna do like a weapon swapping feature. We're gonna
I
do
see.
something a bit larger scale because I want you to really the objective is to pick a feature and then just really dig into everything about that feature. Its UI, UX, how it works structurally in the gameplay, how it works moment to moment, how it actually like plays out in gameplay. Like here's all of the things that the player can do. When you're writing out a feature, you really want to make sure that you're talking about just like really everything that the player can do, right? Like these are all of the options that the player has. You really need to make sure that you go through all of them. And the way that I would do this, my recommendation for how I would do this, is I would pick a feature and then write very briefly just like the overview of the feature. This is what the feature is at a high level. This is what it does. A few sentences, small paragraph. Then from that, identify all of break that feature down into constituent elements that seem to make sense given what the feature is, and just make headers. Like just in a Google Doc, just go heading to this thing, heading to this thing, heading to this thing. Just write all of the headings, all of the headers that you would use. So that you define the sections of your document first. Because then you can look at your document and ask, is this comprehensive? These are all the sections of the document I would do. If I wrote out all these sections, would that correctly describe this feature? Because that's kind of the structure of it, right? Is all the headings that you would use. then you go in and you just start headings and subheadings and whatever you need to do to describe the feature. I would
Okay. Yeah.
expect, since you're choosing relatively large features, whether it's a core gameplay feature or some ancillary system, I would expect that you will probably have enough to write at least 3 or 4,000 words. If you remember, my loot box feature was 3,200, something like that. It's around 3,000. So that's an
How much?
example of a feature.
You said this could be homework if it wasn't finished. How much?
Oh, it's definitely
When
going
is
to be
this?
finished.
When
We'll
when is this due?
we'll just talk about these next week in Project Ideation. In fact, we probably won't talk that much about them because they're going to be long, which means I'm going to have to take them and read them.
Mm.
How much words do you want?
So you
3,000.
should be aiming for somewhere around 3,000. For reference, I can write 3,000 words in about an hour. You're going to have about 3.5 hours. But I will very
Oh.
rarely do this where there's like a word minimum. But one thing I really, really, really want you to get used to doing is writing a lot about a thing in a focused way. Like I want you to get used to writing a lot.
I'm not good with writing.
Well,
That was my
how
least
would you
favorite
like to resolve
subject.
this issue?
Oh no.
This is
I think
gonna
I,
be
I think
very
I,
interesting.
I think I have an
I
idea.
I'm not good at the violin.
You should play it more then.
If my goal was to become a violinist, what should I do?
Um.
Who's the thing?
What would you call that? That
Your
focuses in like
breakfast.
in the, I guess the menu, or like what? I don't want to say menu. Like it's like where like just like crafting, alchemy, and etc. What would that be under?
Or what? I mean, you could do it. What do you mean? Like you could do a crafting system if you want. Sure, that's a feature.
Crafting system. Okay. Oh, okay. I don't know. I mean, like the whole thing. I said, like, because I guess
Sure, yeah.
crafting.
If you pick a game with a relatively robust crafting system and just like explicate the whole feature, just tell me what the feature is. How does it work? How
Okay.
does it
Okay.
work? I want to know how it works. I want to know how it plays, and I want to know how it works. I want to know both things.
I'll do that.
Yeah, this is hard, but it's going to be very important to. I mean, these kinds of exercises are really crucial because they're. This is this is exactly the kind of thing where if you neglect these exercises now, if you neglect these skills now, you'll end up in a situation in, a year or two or whatever where you're like, I became very proficient in Unreal because Unreal is a very easy thing to learn because every time you have something that you want to make, you just look up how to do that and then you do that. And it feels good. There's like this constant sense of progression. Oh, I learned a new thing in the software. Cool. It feels good. These are the things that are very easy to neglect because it doesn't necessarily, the progression of them isn't quite as clear. The frustration level of struggling with it is very high. But also the consequence of neglecting it is that later on, when you're trying to make things, if you didn't know how to do these things and you somehow got into like a game team and they're like, okay, we want to create this thing. Here's our objectives. How do you think we should do that? And you're like, I don't know. You're gonna have a hard time like talking design with people and have a hard time understanding how the design sort of works together with other things. Communicating with other departments is going to be a nightmare. You will not, for example, and this is another big thing, and this is part of why I actually kind of like when people come into this program and they don't really know D&D, because especially if they kind of don't particularly like it, because it's a really good exercise to learn how to build for a system in a way that's appropriate to that system rather than just building a thing that you would personally like. That's a really useful exercise. And this is similar. You will get to, you get to pick your own game and pick your own feature, whatever feature you like doing, but the work is a bit grueling. That's just one of the differences between being an amateur and a professional is that an amateur gets to this part that kind of sucks and they just stop. They just stop. No problem. They're just done. I'm done here. I did the fun part. Now I'm done. But as a professional, somebody's got to figure this out. And these are the skills for that. And fundamentally, it's about writing. Although I will say, if you have things that are easier to illustrate visually, illustrate them visually.
So just instead of like 1,000 words, just illustrate them visually?
No, don't just like slap images in a document.
Yeah,
But
I
like
know.
instead of saying here's a description of the visual thing that you see when you open this menu, and here are all the things. Just give me a screenshot, an annotated screenshot of that visual that says like the screenshot will say something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then beneath that, you have text that's like, thing 1 is this. Here's how it works. Thing 2 is this. Here's how it works.
Hmm.
That way, you don't have to give me a text description of what the menu looks like, just so that you can describe what the things in the menu do. That would be that's very messy. But if you just give me a screenshot and then tell me what I see in the screenshot, that's very useful.
So if I were to go like in MSS Paint and circle like the thing and then just like so like this is what I'm talking about, like something like that, or
Yeah, let me do a quick example of that. Let's see. Let's use see if I can find a screenshot here. Do are you we use The Witcher 3. So let's say I'm describing the combat system in The Witcher 3. One thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to open the document and go, "Hey, in The Witcher 3, uh in The Witcher 3, you can do these things and the here's what's on the screen when you're doing combat in The Witcher 3."
are we supposed to be seeing this or
Yes, hang on, I'm setting it up.
uh
You wouldn't. The point is, you wouldn't like write in a document. Um, in The Witcher 3, there are enemies that come at you in 3D space, and like, here's how they. You wouldn't describe how they look. You would just give me this,
mhm.
and then I might do something like. That doesn't make any sense. But we have okay. We have. I need something. I need something that you can actually see.
Teal or like a bright blue should work.
I'm gonna do this. Two. We're gonna do one. In fact, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go like this. Oh, I have stuff on here already. This is the status bar. I'm just gonna say status.
Enemy.
Player character. Um,
Consumables.
consumables. Quick reference. mini map, and
Quest bar or
objective.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever you want. Point is, you can call it whatever you want. But see, like now I can go in a document and I can go status. Here are the things in the status section. This is how they work. In the status section, we have this meter, this meter, this meter, the magic meter, and then we have like your status icons.
Mm-hmm.
In the enemy, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 1, 2, 3. This might not be warranted for consumables. This probably isn't warranted for quick reference. But here we have the mini map. And then we have like 1, 2.
I think he also has a compass.
Yeah, we could put a compass on there if you wanted. I mean, I might just put that under the mini map, but you could also add it. And see now if you put this at the top of a document, or top of a section of your document, and then you say status. 1, this is what this is. This is how it works. 2, this is the health bar. This is how the health bar works. This is how it interacts with other things. This is the animations that it plays when something happens. 5, this is the status thing. This is your status. What would you call it? The status indicators of all the statuses that you currently have. 4 is your magic bar. I don't remember what 3 is. I don't know what that is. It's been a while since I played The Witcher 3.
3? I think it's the like if you drink too much potion, like a
The
poison.
toxicity meter. Yeah, your potion
Yeah,
toxicity.
yeah.
Right. So you have your potion toxicity. And how does potion toxicity work? Right?
Drinking
So-
too much.
So this is why this is what I mean by when you have something that would be more useful as a visual reference, use visual reference. You wouldn't use this in place of documentation of writing. But now when you tell me there's an enemy on the field and there's like there's a status section in the top left of the screen and you reference these specific things, I know what you're referencing. So when I read what you're describing, I have an understanding I have some context for that.
Okay.
Rather than if you tried to describe that without this visual reference, it would be a nightmare for me to try to understand what you're even talking about at any point, right?
Okay. So use like a reference thing like this.
Mhm.
Okay.
And by the
I
way,
would definitely do that. That makes it a lot easier for me there.
when you're doing your own games, if you were designing something, a third-person action game, you would do something like, okay, I have like a guy on the screen, like here, and let's give him a sword, and then he'll be fighting like a big scary guy who's very muscular for some reason, and then he's on the screen too, and we maybe want him a little bit bigger. This guy like here, kind of centered, and then we go. Oh, we need a health bar. And then these days, every game has a stamina bar or like a mana bar or whatever it is. We can put statuses here. We can put, there's an indicator. Maybe we could do something like there's like an indicator. Remember in Ocarina of Time, we have this target lock indicator. So if you're designing your own game, these kinds of visual references are still really valuable because we can still get a much better, much clearer sense of what it looks like. Great example also of that is if we go back to my... Where are you? Where are you? Too many things. This. Bullet hell template, which is what I called it for some reason. It's a top-down bullet hell. In the game, players control a small ship in an abstract space, dodging incoming enemies, projectiles, and other dangers. The player can move freely in 2 dimensions. A short test of iframes to the player.
So how many words does this have?
This is 647.
Holy cow.
So I could just do something like, okay, I want this to look like this. And this is my player character. And then there's like obstacles on the screen, like there's like a snake thing that goes like this, and the snake thing has, you know, saw blades on it that rotate. There's these saw blades, and the snake is gonna come down like this. Be a dotted line, but whatever. The point being, like, suddenly you have like a much clearer idea of what the gameplay might look like, and so everything else makes much more sense, even with a really quick, rough mock-up, right?
So you're just looking for something around 3,000, not like 3,000 or more.
I'm expecting thoroughness, which
Thoroughness?
will probably end up being several thousand words, 4,000, something like
Okay,
that.
so you want it to be super, super thorough throughout
Very
this entire
thorough,
thing.
very detailed, but also very focused.
Mm-hmm.
And well organized. This is another really important component in writing good documentation, is being well organized. This is the high level thing. It's made up of these things. Now I'm going to explain each of these things, but they each have sub elements that I need to work out also. So let me work out those sub elements, but focused, so that the document reads in a very clear, very concise way, very structured way.
Okay.
And that's it. That's all we have for today.
We still have
30
uh
minutes.
about a half hour.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say just get started. And like, I'm here if you need help getting started, or any help while you get started, and then you'll get a little bit better of a, hopefully a better
So you want us to
kickoff.
do it in a Google Docs, right?
Yeah, it should all be Google Docs.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds good then. And we'll see you at 2 then.
Yes, we have.
Game design, I think.
Is it? I always get them. I always get game design and game mechanics mixed up.
No, game design.
Game design. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll do
Who
game
do we have
design.
game design with?
Me.
All right.
And then game art later tonight, apparently. Is that right?
I think game art, is this going to be the first game art we've done? Because I confused Colin with because he's 3D modeling as well.
Oh yeah, he does both.
Yeah. Okay.
69. See how that goes.
All right. Well, should we stay on call for the last half hour, or do we just go
Yeah,
work?
I'm gonna be here for the next 25 minutes in case anybody needs anything.
Okay.
Get started and see what you can do.
All right.
Hmm.
I guess how formal do you want it written? Or as long as it's detailed? Or not?
I mean, if you're writing in a detailed and concise way, it will end up sounding kind of formal, probably.
I guess so, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of other stuff, like it's just a matter of like, yeah, use like good grammar. I don't know.
Yeah, obviously. Like, should I make note to avoid I statements? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh,
Some
yeah. So yeah, you don't really want to talk about this. Isn't really about you at all. It's about the game and the player. Those are the two things that matter. The player in this case representing like a hypothetical player that does all the things that you want your player to do. Because what you're doing is you're kind of outlining like this is what players do, and then if you were making your own game, you would be outlining what you want the hypothetical player to do. Like this is the ideal player interaction process, and then the game that you develop should make that the player interact in that way. So yeah, you want to be talking about the player and the structure of the game, but also like the technical aspects in terms of what needs to be made. Not the technical aspects in terms of how you would build it. So you don't talk about like this is how I would code this or this is what what a blueprint would look like, but you do want any logic that's relevant to gameplay does need to be included. So, for example, you've been doing pseudocode in programming, right? Game design at a deep level does include pseudocode or something very much like it because you might be doing something like you might need to understand the behavior of an entity where the entity is a health bar. Well, what happens when you take damage in a game? A number
your health bar goes down.
your health decreases and your health bar changes to reflect the current values, right? But what happens between those two things? Usually, it plays a little animation, right? Does the health bar
Mhm.
does the health bar go from full to whatever percent on the exact same frame that you take damage with nothing else? The red bar just goes. Also, is it a red bar? Does it go from full to 70% or whatever over the course of one frame, and it just is different now? No, it plays a little animation, doesn't it? Even a simple one. So in a design document, you would describe that it plays an animation because that's part of its behavior. It needs to play this animation. This is part of the gameplay feedback. It's important that it plays this animation. So you would include that. When you take damage, your health de-increments by the amount of damage that you took, and the health bar plays an animation. So if you're talking about the behavior of the health bar, you don't make reference to how taking damage works, but you do make reference to how the health bar responds to taking damage. You don't care about how the health bar is implemented on like a programmatical level, but you do care about the behavior of the health bar on that trigger. The logic of that. When you heal in Hollow Knight, the health bar like vibrates. So you would want, as the designer of that system, you would want to make sure that you're describing the health animation as being different from the taking damage animation on the health bar. This is all just in reference to describing the behavior of the health bar as an entity. But you would want that all to be part of your description, because you want that logic to be understood. You want that logic to the logic matters because it determines things like gameplay feedback and game feel and the clarity of the feedback and what you're giving feedback for and how you're communicating those things. Those are all things that as a designer you need to care about.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess I'm just gonna get started then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Get on it.
my recommendation here would be to do a lot of free writing and then editing. So if you find yourself getting stuck, like you're sitting there staring at a blank page, think about the progress of that, right? If you've been sitting there staring at a mostly blank page for 10 or 15 minutes and you're not making any progress, how the hell are you going to get 3,000 words out in 3 hours? If it's been 10 minutes, you've got nothing. So what I would recommend, there's a process here that you can use, it's a little bit of a trick. Just start free writing about the system. Just start describing the system in a free write, where your objective is to just not stop writing. So even if you get stuck and you're like, well, this has this, but then this happens, and I don't really know how that connects to anything. Like you just stream of consciousness. You just write out, I don't really know how that connects to anything, because the goal is to just not stop writing. You stay focused, but just don't stop writing. Then every 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, stop, read what you've written, and then just delete everything that's irrelevant. And then do another one. Do that for maybe 30 or 40 minutes. Then figure out from there, start figuring out what the structure of the document is. Having that free write can help break that barrier of just like, I don't know what it is. There's something about a blank page that's very intimidating when you're not used to writing a lot. And just getting something down that's vaguely relevant can help with that a lot. Better to just start and then fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can start with anything. Anything. Why don't I exemplify this real quick? Oops, that's not what I want. Where's doc?
The picture I had.
All right. Here's my document. I'm going to exemplify the process of free writing and then fixing. I'm going to design a game here about, I don't know, something to do with, hey, I remember back in the day when I played, what was that game called? The Weeb game with tactics. You know the one.
The what?
The Weeb game with tactics. It was
The weed game.
tactical Weeb game. Tactical
Oh,
strategy one.
I wasn't looking at your document.
Where
I thought you were saying
there's,
weed game.
like Fire Emblem. It was called Fire Emblem. Okay, so Fire Emblem is basically a turn-based thing where you move units, but you can choose which units to move on your turn, and they're limited by different resources like movement speed, etc., rather than having move unique turns per unit. One important thing about Fire Emblem that it has a big focus on its challenge mode where units can die permanently. And that is very sad if you like them as people. Which means the story is kind of an important thing, since it's what gives the units permadeaths emotional weight beyond just the sunk cost of what you put into advancing them.
You've played Fire Emblem, so I
Speaking
had no idea when characters die, they actually die.
in some of them they do. In the later ones, they made it so there's two modes. You can switch to like story mode, and it doesn't matter anymore. But Fire Emblem originally was built around this idea that like your character deaths are permanent, and your decisions like you have to really be careful. They really wanted to make it so that characters are the character's safety was like important to you in the battle. Speaking of advancing characters, each one levels up, and that's a whole thing. It's a whole system where you select classes for them, and you can unlock them, and they're good with different characters in different ways. Because there's a whole thing about their stats and how their stats improve, and different games handle that differently. But if I want to make a small scale thing, maybe just having characters have basic stats that don't really change much makes the most sense. So this is what I mean by starting with a free write. This is 90% garbage. But what I'm gonna, I can extract from this is like, okay, it's tactical turn-based. Characters are important. Characters have specific constraints, but you can move them in any order on your turn. And that's about it, because I'm kind of getting rid of no advancement. I don't really have much in I sort of said I don't want much in the way of advancement, but I do want it to be tactical turn-based. So now I need to figure out how is it tactical turn-based, because there's a lot of ways to do that. And then I just do another free write for that. And this pretty much is the significant information that I got out of that free write. That's a really useful process if you're stuck on a blank page, you don't really know how to start. Like, that's what I mean by just start. The opening sentence, I don't remember, it was something like, what was the opening sentence? I'm gonna design a game here about, I don't know, something to do with, hey, remember when I played that one game that I can't remember the name of? And the rest of that paragraph is me trying to remember the name of the game. But then I went, oh yeah, Fire Emblem. Okay, so Fire Emblem is like a turn-based thing. You move your units, sort of like describing Hollow Knight. Fire Emblem. That's how you do free writes.
So it doesn't have to be just games that we know.
Well, in this case, you are describing a game that you know. I did not do that just now, but well, I kind of did because I started describing Fire Emblem. But
Mm-hmm.
then if I was doing your exercise, I would have, instead of saying here's the game I want to design, it's going to be kind of like Fire Emblem. I would say, well, I'm choosing a feature from Fire Emblem, so the next thing would be like, what feature should I use? How about what if I did the character upgrade feature from, I don't know, Three Houses? Fire Emblem Three
Okay.
Houses. How do character upgrades work in Fire Emblem Three Houses? And then I'd go, I mean, I know vaguely how they work, but I don't know a lot of the specifics. And then I'd probably look up gameplay because I would need to look up gameplay and do research with a specific question in mind.
True. Okay.
Yeah, this is going to be a tedious, grueling, horrible assignment. It's going to be awful.
Too bad, not too. Let's see what do I miss. Oh goodness, what big days. Oh. I don't remember what is it called. You know, and just oh, what? Okay, so far so good. Let's see. Is there? I forgot what that one is.
By the way, one more thing that I would just consider were I you is getting early feedback on things from me or even just anybody else, just each other. See where it's tracking. See how it's tracking early on. That's a really good habit to get into.
Like
Whenever,
feedback, just like
yeah,
just show what we
Would
have,
it
you know?
would it
does
be
this make
better
sense?
to technically have something with more UIs or stuff like that if you're doing
No.
like a
UI
no?
isn't any less complicated than any system or anything else.
I'm doing me.
If you're doing UI as a feature, you need to be prepared to do a UX flow, which I
UX flow?
presume you don't know how to do.
I do not.
And that's what I have so far.
So, like, here, I'll send you an image if that's alright. If I want to do something like this.
Yeah, you would probably your mock-up would probably look similar to that because you would be able to yeah explain what each of these things is and what the logic behind each of them is and how it works, what it connects to.
Okay.
Does it play any animations or sound effects at all times? If it does, but only in certain instances, when are those instances and what are those sound effects? When it changes state.
So this would be perfectly fine to do.
Uh, I wouldn't use this image because it would be better to go through the process yourself. This is
Yeah, I know, but like
this is
this is
about
just like an example I found.
yeah, yeah. It will probably look something very much like this. Yeah.
Okay.
What you writing?
Yep.
Let's see. Just what am I missing? I should be fine. Just keep writing. Okay.
Next class, or are we the one in at 2? That's when we're going to talk about the amnesia playthroughs, and we're going back to that.
No. Game histories when we're gonna do the
Amnesia.
walkthrough analyses. We're gonna talk
Okay.
about Death House.
Oh, right.
Wood.
Okay.
I think we did pretty good on that.
Good.
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah, we had like a 2-hour session, so
That's not crazy long. Yeah, we did.
At least we were able to do everything that we need to do. I think that's the most important part. We won
Well,
at the end of the session.
We only had the combat encounter.
Yeah.
and we'll talk about how it played out and what we can learn from it, and then we'll probably talk about our.
All I'll say now is pain. That's all I'll say.
Alright.
Well,
Guess
all right.
back.
We'll reconvene in an hour.
alright.
Also,
Ciao, ciao.
I will ask as well though, does it matter on what feature in the game that we talk about? Does it matter what, or can we just talk about a feature?
Not
in the
really.
game?
This
Like,
is
it's-
really the exercise here is really just the process of digging into it. It's just like practice digging into the details of a thing and understanding how they relate to each other.
So it's
Okay,
just like a
'cause-
practice for now? Okay.
Well, I mean, producing a full and a complete, comprehensive, well articulated document
Mhm.
is what will get you that practice.
Right.
'cause
Guess
I'm
I'll
thinking
see you
about
guys
doing
in an
mine
hour.
on I'm thinking about doing mine on Monster Hunter and like the Turf Wars, but
Sure.
that's I don't know. I don't know if I was allowed to actually do that because I don't know if that would technically be considered just more of a feature or if that was just more just something that was in the game.
Well, I mean, do whatever you want. Just make sure it's clear what you're talking about, how it's categorized, how it fits in the game overall, and then all of the details of it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Then.
I'll see you guys in an hour.
See you in a bit.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna pick a game everybody knows. So yeah, but yeah, see you guys in an hour.